Rivalry as evidence for non-unified consciousness. You put on a special pair of goggles. In one eye, you see a bright red square. In the other eye, you see a bright green square. Both are shown at the exact same time. But here's the twist. Your brain does not merge them into some strange red and green mix. Instead, your awareness flips back and forth. One moment you clearly see red, then suddenly it vanishes and green takes over. Then red again, then green, on and on. It is like two different realities are fighting for your attention, and only one can win at a time. Now pause on that for a second. That means right now, while both of your eyes are being stimulated, while your brain is technically receiving both signals, your conscious experience can only host one. The other is suppressed. This simple, almost silly experiment with colored shapes exposes something deeply unsettling. It suggests that consciousness is not one unified movie screen in your head. It is not one continuous spotlight that takes in everything at once. Instead, it is fragmented, competitive, and unstable. And that is shocking, right? Because we all walk around feeling like we have one mind, one perspective, one stream of experience. We trust that what we see is the whole picture. But binocular rivalry rips that illusion apart. Your own brain hides information from you. It chooses one version of reality to let you experience while completely shutting out the other. That is not a minor glitch. That is proof that consciousness itself is stitched together out of competing processes. It means what you call your awareness is less like a king on a throne and more like a referee trying to manage a brawl. Think about how disturbing that really is. When you are watching the red square, the green one does not fade politely into the background. It is still there, still firing signals, still demanding recognition. But you are blind to it. Your brain simply refuses to give you access. You live inside a curated feed. It is the original algorithm. And just like scrolling through social media, you are not seeing the full truth, only the part selected for you. And here is where it gets validating. Because if you have ever felt like your mind is divided, like part of you wants one thing while another part of you wants the opposite, you are not crazy. That is literally how the machinery of your consciousness is built. Rivalry shows us that different neural populations in the brain compete for dominance, and only one gets to reach awareness at a time. That tug of war you feel when you cannot decide between two choices, or when you are torn between logic and emotion, is not a flaw. It is the default state of the system. Consciousness is not unified. It is a constant negotiation between rival processes that each want to claim the spotlight. Here is a way to picture it. Imagine you are at a party with two groups of friends on opposite sides of the room. Both groups are calling your name. Both groups want your attention, and you can only stand with one at a time. You walk to one side, you join in. You laugh, you feel fully present with them. Then, a minute later, the other group pulls you over, and now you are fully immersed in their conversation. At no point are you hanging in the middle experiencing both. You are switching back and forth. That is how your brain treats perception itself. And it does not just happen with colored squares. Rivalry has been tested with complex images too. One eye sees a face, the other sees a house. What happens? You do not see a blended face house. You see a face. Then it disappears. Then you see a house. Then it disappears. The experience is binary. Consciousness refuses to host both at once, which forces us to confront a brutal question. If your awareness can be split, filtered, and flipped this easily, how much of reality are you missing every second of your life? That question should sting a little, because it means you are not a single self gazing out at the world. You are more like a series of competing selves, each taking turns at the microphone. Your perception of unity is a construction, a narrative your brain tells after the fact. Rivalry tears the mask off and shows you the gears underneath. And here is the tease. If rivalry proves that consciousness is fragmented, not unified, what does that mean for free will? What does it mean for personal identity? If your awareness is just whichever process happens to win the competition at that moment, are you really the one in control? Or are you simply watching the outcome of battles you never even knew were happening? Before we move on to the next topic, drop a quick comment and let us know where you're watching this from and what time it is for you. It's amazing how we're all connected, each of us chasing that perfect night's sleep. If this resonates with you, please like this video, subscribe to our channel Restwise, and join the journey. The split perception effect on decision making. You are standing at a crosswalk, ready to step into the street. A car approaches from your left. A cyclist approaches from your right. Both are moving fast. You have to decide when it is safe to cross. You believe you are calmly weighing both sides at once, but your brain is not built that way. Binocular rivalry reveals something almost terrifying. Your perception of the world is not a single seamless canvas. It is divided, unstable, constantly switching. That means when you face a decision, you might not actually be working with the whole picture. You might be acting on whichever slice of perception happened to win in that split second. That should make you uneasy, because the very idea of free choice depends on the assumption that you are aware of all the relevant information before you decide. Rivalry smashes that assumption. It shows that your brain filters, hides, and flips between competing inputs without your permission. Imagine being in a courtroom and the judge only hears one lawyer at a time, flipping back and forth, never both at once. That is how your brain treats perception before a decision. You are not choosing with clarity. You are choosing inside a bottleneck. And here is the kicker. Studies have shown that when people are exposed to rival images, their decisions about those images reflect whichever one was dominant at that instant. If the face was winning, they judged a face-related question faster. If the house was winning, the opposite happened. This means your choices can swing wildly, not because of reason, not because of values, but because of a hidden tug of war in your brain. That is not rational decision-making. That is roulette. Now let's validate this with real-life experience. Have you ever made a snap decision, only to regret it seconds later when new information popped into awareness? You think, why did I not consider that? Rivalry tells us the answer. You did not consider it because in that moment, it was suppressed. It was invisible to your conscious mind, even though your brain technically had the information. This is why people feel torn in relationships, in careers, in moral dilemmas. It is not simply indecision. It is that different perceptions, different priorities, are literally taking turns controlling the spotlight. You can only make decisions based on the version of reality you are currently seeing. Think about how this plays out in everyday life. A politician makes a speech. If you are primed to notice their confidence, that perception dominates, and you decide they are trustworthy. But if your brain locks onto a nervous gesture, the rival perception takes over, and you decide the opposite. Both signals exist. Your brain cannot host both at once. And so your decision is shaped by whichever perception happens to be visible in that fleeting moment. That is not stable reasoning. That is perception rivalry dressed up as judgment. And this explains something we all wrestle with: the experience of changing your mind without knowing why. One moment you are convinced you want to buy that car. The next moment doubt creeps in and you feel you absolutely should not. The details of the car did not change. What changed was which perception won the battle inside your mind. Maybe the excitement of owning it dominated first. Then the financial risk surged forward and flipped the decision. Your choices are built on shifting perceptual ground, and rivalry exposes the cracks. It is almost like being two people at once. One version of you sees red. Another version sees green. One version says go for it. Another says hold back. Only one gets to speak at a time, but both are real. Both are alive within your neural circuitry. Decision-making is not a clean executive function. It is a game of perception musical chairs. Whoever sits down first shapes your choice. And here is where the tease comes in. If rivalry can swing your decisions just by suppressing half the picture, then how much control do you really have over your own choices? What does it mean for free will when the building blocks of your decisions are determined by unconscious rivalries you cannot access? If your awareness is only ever half the story, then are you actually deciding, or are you just narrating the outcome of a battle that was already decided behind the curtain? Rivalry as a metaphor for divided identity. You know that strange moment when you feel like two versions of yourself are fighting inside your head. One part wants to play it safe. The other part wants to take a leap. One part wants to forgive. The other part wants to hold a grudge. It feels almost like there are two different people living in the same body. Binocular rivalry is not just about vision. It is the perfect metaphor for this divided identity we all wrestle with. Here is why. When you look at two competing images, your brain does not blend them into a compromise. You do not see half red and half green. You see one, then the other, back and forth, back and forth. One wins, then loses, then wins again. That is exactly how identity feels when you are torn between different roles or desires. There is no unified you calmly balancing everything. There are competing selves, each demanding the spotlight, each pushing the other out of awareness. And here is the shocking part. Rivalry shows us that your sense of self is not a single continuous thread. It is stitched together moment by moment. Just like your awareness flips between images, your identity flips between roles. One moment you are the child seeking approval. The next you are the confident adult. Then suddenly you are the insecure teenager again. We think identity is stable, but rivalry reveals it as a constant switching game. Think of how unsettling that is, because deep down we all cling to the idea that we are one person, that there is a solid core, a true self that stays the same no matter what. But rivalry laughs at that. It says no, you are a collection of selves, each one capable of taking over completely, making you feel like it is the only truth. When red is dominant, green does not feel half present. It is gone. When one identity dominates, the others feel like they never existed. But they are still there, waiting ready to flip back at any moment. This explains so many contradictions in human behavior. Think about people who say, I do not know why I keep making choices that contradict each other. One day I feel motivated to work out. The next day I do not even care. One day I want to be generous. The next I want to protect myself. That is not weakness. That is rivalry at work. Because when one version of you steps forward, it can dominate so completely that you forget the others even exist. And then the flip happens, and suddenly you feel like a different person, but it is still you. Here is a picture. Imagine two radio stations broadcasting at the same time. You cannot hear both at once. Your dial shifts back and forth, and whichever signal is stronger fills your speakers. That is your identity. Different stations of self, battling for clarity, each flooding your consciousness while the other fades into static. And the illusion is that whichever self is loudest feels like the real you, until it flips again. And that illusion can be dangerous, because you can make promises while one self is dominant, only to break them when another takes control. You can truly mean yes in one moment and truly mean no in the next. Not because you are dishonest, but because the self who said yes got pushed aside. Rivalry helps us understand why people seem inconsistent, why relationships fracture, why even our own past decisions sometimes feel alien to us. It is not that we were lying then or lying now. It is that different selves took the microphone. But here is the validation. If you have ever felt fake or inconsistent because you behave differently in different settings, that does not mean you are broken. It means you are normal. Rivalry tells us this is not a glitch in the system. It is the system. Your identity is not a fixed sculpture. It is a shifting spotlight. At work, one version dominates. At home, another. In solitude, yet another. They cannot all speak at once, so they trade turns. Rivalry makes that process visible. And it is not just psychology. Neuroscience has found that different networks in the brain light up depending on context. The social self, the private self, the future-oriented self, the past-oriented self. Each of these networks competes for dominance. Just like the red and green images, they cannot all be conscious at once. Rivalry is not just a metaphor. It is a mirror for how your brain actually runs your identity. Once you realize this, something powerful happens. You stop clinging to the idea of a single true self. You can accept that you are many selves, and that life is about navigating the switches, not erasing them. Just like in rivalry, there is no final winner. The images keep alternating. The same is true with identity. You are not meant to collapse into one permanent self. You are meant to host the rivalry. But the tease is this. If your identity is a rivalry, constantly flipping between selves, then who exactly is the one watching? If you are not one unified self, but a stage where selves take turns performing, then what does it mean to be you? Are you the red? Are you the green? Or are you just the empty screen on which the rivalry plays out? And if that is true, maybe the deepest part of you is not any of the selves at all, but the silence that remains when they switch. Revelry and altered states of consciousness. Close your eyes for a second and imagine drifting into a dream. The logic of waking life melts away. Strange images rise, scenes unfold, and you accept them as real until you wake up. Now think about a psychedelic trip, or even deep meditation, where your sense of self stretches, fragments, or dissolves. These altered states feel bizarre because they remind you that consciousness is not fixed. It can bend, twist, and take on forms you never expected. Binocular rivalry is like a doorway into that realization. It is a tiny laboratory version of what altered states do on a massive scale. Here is how. When two different images fight for your awareness, you are not in control of which one wins. Your conscious experience shifts without your permission. One moment you are seeing a face, the next moment it is gone, replaced by a house. It is like waking up from a dream inside your waking life. Rivalry shows you how fragile your sense of continuity really is. That same fragility underlies every altered state, whether it is a psychedelic journey, a dream, or even hypnosis. Your conscious experience is always at the mercy of competing brain processes. And that is the shocking part. Because we walk around assuming our consciousness is steady. We believe there is one unified thread of perception that can be trusted. But Rivalry reveals that stability is an illusion. Your mind can be split in half by nothing more than a pair of images. That means what you take for granted as waking reality is just the dominant winner of an internal battle. Altered states are not exceptions. They are simply what happens when the balance of power shifts in unusual ways. Think about dreaming. You are lying in bed, eyes closed, receiving no external images at all. Yet your brain generates entire worlds. Rivalry proves that your brain is already capable of suppressing one reality and replacing it with another. Dreams are simply rivalry without any external anchor. One network dominates, then another, switching so fluidly that you believe you are experiencing a continuous narrative. But it is not continuous. It is stitched together moment by moment, exactly like Rivalry. Or take psychedelics. People describe visuals that breathe, morph, and shift unpredictably. They describe identities dissolving, perspectives flipping back and forth between the self and the outside world. Rivalry is the same mechanism in miniature. Instead of two colored squares fighting for dominance, you have massive networks of the brain competing. One network makes you feel like an individual self, another dissolves boundaries and makes you feel merged with everything. And they take turns, flashing in and out of awareness, just like red and green. And here is where you might recognize yourself. Have you ever had a dream so vivid that when you woke up, you felt disoriented, almost split between two realities? Or maybe you have tried meditation, and for a moment your sense of self flickered away, leaving only the raw experience of breathing. That flicker is rivalry at work. Consciousness is not one smooth line. It is a series of shifts, switches, and takeovers. Rivalry just makes the switches visible in real time. That should feel validating, because it means altered states are not supernatural, not random glitches, not signs of something wrong with you. They are natural expressions of how your consciousness always works. Rivalry is the everyday version, tiny and manageable. Altered states are the amplified version, stretched across larger and deeper parts of your brain. If you have ever wondered why a trip or a dream feels so real, it is because the same underlying competition is running the show. Only now, the winners and losers are entire realities, not just simple images. And here is another layer. Rivalry explains why altered states can feel both enlightening and terrifying. When your sense of self is suppressed, another perspective takes over. Sometimes that perspective feels expansive and liberating. Sometimes it feels alien and frightening. Just like seeing the house when you expected the face, it jolts you. It feels wrong, even though it is just another process claiming awareness. Rivalry shows that all altered states are real in their own moment. When one dominates, it feels like the only truth, until it flips again. This is where the metaphor becomes powerful. Rivalry teaches us that consciousness is not a fixed structure. It is a stage where different processes, identities, and realities step forward, take the spotlight, and then fade. Dreams, trips, meditations, hypnotic trances, even flow states. All of them are shifts in which processes are allowed on stage. The audience, which is your awareness, sees only one act at a time, but the rest are always waiting in the wings. But the tease is this. If rivalry and altered states both show that your consciousness can be replaced, switched, or rewritten in an instant, then what does that say about waking life itself? The reality you trust right now, the stable room, the chair you are sitting on, the sense of self you feel as you listen. What if that too is just another rivalry winner, another fragile state that could flip into something entirely different? If altered states are rivalries on steroids, then maybe ordinary life is just the rivalry we all agree to call reality. Rivalries linked to dream-like experiences. Have you ever woken from a dream that felt so real you had to check your surroundings to make sure you were awake? That bizarre in-between space, where your mind feels split between dream logic and waking clarity, is closer to binocular rivalry than you might think. Rivalry is not just a visual trick. It is a living demonstration of how your brain can slip into dream-like states even when you are fully awake, eyes wide open. Here is what I mean. When two different images are shown to your eyes at the same time, your awareness does not merge them. It flips. One moment you are seeing a clear picture, the next it is replaced. That sudden switch feels almost like the way dreams shift without warning. You are talking to someone, then suddenly you are in a different place, with no transition, no explanation, and yet it feels normal in the moment. Rivalry gives you that same sensation in miniature, a visual dream glitch happening while you are conscious. And here is the shocker. Rivalry and dreaming share the same underlying principle. Both show that your brain does not need consistency to convince you something is real. In rivalry, each image feels complete and unquestionable, even though it is constantly flipping. In dreams, each scene feels continuous, even though the narrative jumps make no sense. Your brain edits the story for you on the fly. Rivalry is proof that you can experience discontinuity as if it were seamless reality. Think about how strange that really is. You could be staring at two stable, unchanging images for 3 hours, and yet your experience of them is unstable, shifting, dream-like. That means the dream state is not limited to sleep. It can be triggered by simple perception, by the way your brain decides which signals get the spotlight. Rivalry is like dreaming with your eyes open, and this helps explain something we all experience. Those little lapses in attention when you zone out, when you lose track of time, when your mind drifts into a daydream so vivid that you have to snap yourself back. Rivalry shows that those states are not separate from ordinary perception. They are built into it. Consciousness itself is already dream-like. Rivalry just exposes the dreamlike mechanics underneath. Here is where it gets validating. If you have ever wondered why your dreams can feel as real as waking life, rivalry tells you why. It is because your awareness only ever sees one version of reality at a time. Just like in rivalry, when one image dominates, it feels completely real, while the other is hidden. Dreams work the same way. When one scene takes over, it feels solid, while all other possible realities are suppressed. Your brain does not need external truth to feel convinced. It just needs one dominant process to silence the others. And it is not only about visuals. Rivalry has been studied with emotional content too. One image might show a fearful face, the other a neutral one. Depending on which one dominates, your entire state shifts. This is exactly what happens in dreams. One moment you are calm, then a threat appears, and suddenly the whole emotional tone of the dream changes. Rivalry shows that these dream-like flips are not random. They are part of how perception itself is organized. Think about the way stories work in dreams. They are often fragmented, stitched together. yet somehow convincing in the moment. Rivalry works the same way. The switches are abrupt, but your brain smooths them over. You rarely notice the transitions. You simply accept the new image as reality. That acceptance is the dream-like part. Your mind does not resist the flip. It embraces it, as if saying, "Yes, this is the truth now." And here is the part that should make you pause. Revelry is not just a metaphor for dreaming. It suggests that waking life and dreams are built from the same fragile fabric. Both are experiences stitched together from competing processes. Both feel stable even though they are constantly flipping. Both convince you that what you see is the only truth until it vanishes and another takes its place. So here is the tease. If rivalry can show you dream logic in waking life, what does that mean for the boundary between sleeping and waking? If both rely on the same mechanisms, maybe that boundary is thinner than we think. Maybe reality itself is not as different from dreaming as it feels. And if rivalry is a waking dream, then maybe dreaming is just another rivalry, one where the brain gets to decide all the images on its own. How the brain resolves conflicting visual inputs. Imagine two friends talking to you at the same time, both demanding your full attention. One tells you a story about their weekend, the other is explaining a problem at work. You cannot truly listen to both at once, even though both voices are reaching your ears. What do? You tune into one, then the other, back and forth, without realizing you are filtering. That is exactly how your brain deals with conflicting visual inputs, and binocular rivalry is the clearest proof. Here is how it works. When each of your eyes is shown a different image, your brain cannot simply layer them together into a hybrid. Instead, it lets one dominate, then flips again. In other words, your brain resolves the conflict not by compromise, but by competition. One signal wins, the other is silenced. This is not a design flaw. It is the built-in way your mind keeps perception manageable. If both signals were allowed in full, your awareness would collapse into chaos. And here is the shocking part. This means that what you see is not everything your brain sees. The suppressed image does not vanish. It is still being processed at lower levels. It still influences your brain, but you are blind to it. Imagine trying to make a decision while someone whispers advice you cannot consciously hear. That advice might still steer you, but you will believe you are deciding on your own. The same thing happens in rivalry. Your awareness is the edited highlight reel, not the raw footage. Think about how unsettling that is. You assume your eyes deliver a full and accurate account of reality, but rivalry proves that your brain acts more like a ruthless editor. It chooses what gets into consciousness and what gets cut. When two inputs conflict, your brain does not present both sides. It picks a winner, hides the loser, and presents you with a polished version that feels seamless. That should make you wonder how much of reality is being hidden from you right now. Here is a way to visualize it. Picture a courtroom where two lawyers are arguing. Instead of letting the jury hear both sides, the judge silences one microphone at a time. The jury only hears whichever lawyer the judge allows, switching back and forth. That jury is your conscious mind. You believe you are weighing all the evidence, but in truth, you are only hearing fragments. The rest is censored before it even reaches you. Now here is the validating part. If you have ever felt confused, overwhelmed, or indecisive when confronted with too many options, you are not weak. You are running into the same limitation rivalry exposes. Your brain cannot juggle conflicting inputs in full. It forces them into a competition. That is why you might feel torn, switching perspectives from one moment to the next. The brain is not giving you the whole truth at once. It is resolving the conflict by alternating. This also explains why you can sense things you are not fully aware of. For example, when one suppressed image in Rivalry is threatening, like a fearful face, your body can still react with heightened alertness, even though you do not consciously see it. The hidden input leaks into your physiology. Your awareness tells you one story, but the rest of your brain is already preparing for another. This is how conflicting inputs are resolved. One is chosen for consciousness, the other continues working in the background. Think about how this shapes daily life. When two interpretations of a situation are possible, you rarely experience them side by side. You experience one, then the other. When you feel optimistic about a decision 1 minute and anxious about it the next, you are living through the same rivalry principle. Your brain is not mixing perspectives. It is flipping between them, giving each its moment of dominance. The conflict is resolved by taking turns, and here is the deeper point. The fact that your brain handles conflict through rivalry reveals something profound about perception. You do not see reality directly. You see whatever wins the competition for conscious access. Your brain is constantly editing, filtering, suppressing, and presenting the version of the world that feels most coherent in that instant. Coherence, not truth, is the priority. Rivalry lays that bare. But here is the tease. If the brain resolves conflicting inputs by silencing one and amplifying the other, then what else in your life is being hidden from your awareness? How many competing realities are being processed right now without ever reaching you? And if consciousness is only ever the winner of an invisible battle, can you really trust the world you see, or are you just seeing the side of reality that happened to shout the loudest? Rivalry as a metaphor for conflicting thoughts. Have you ever sat in silence and felt like two voices inside your head were arguing? One telling you to take the risk, the other warning you to play it safe. One insisting you speak up, the other pushing you to stay quiet. We like to think of thoughts as something neat and ordered, but most of the time they are rivals fighting for dominance. That inner battle is exactly what binocular rivalry reveals. The same way two images compete for awareness in your vision, two thoughts compete for control in your mind. Here is why this matters. In rivalry, your brain does not blend the two images. You never see red and green fused into one. You see one, then it disappears, then the other, back and forth. Your thinking works the same way. When two thoughts clash, you do not hold both with equal clarity. One takes over, floods your awareness, feels like the only truth. Then it fades, replaced by the other. Your inner life is less a chorus of ideas and more a spotlight swinging wildly across competing voices. And here is the shocking part. That means your sense of rationality, your ability to weigh thoughts objectively, is not what you think it is. You are not calmly holding both options in balance. You are flipping between them, just like rivalry. One moment the thought of quitting your job feels obvious and inevitable. The next moment the thought of staying feels equally undeniable. Both exist in your mind, but only one can dominate awareness at a time, which means your decisions are shaped by whichever thought happens to win the battle in that moment. Think of how destabilizing that is. You assume your thoughts belong to you, that you are the one organizing them. Rivalry shows that is not true. You are not choosing which thought enters awareness. The competition is happening beneath the surface, and you only experience the victor. It feels like you made up your mind. But what really happened is that one thought silenced the other long enough to convince you it was the only one. Here is a metaphor. Imagine two people in a debate, standing on a stage, but there is only one working microphone. They can both speak, but only one gets amplified at a time. The audience, which is your awareness, hears one side, then the other, never both together. That is your inner dialogue. Conflicting thoughts do not merge into clarity. They take turns monopolizing the microphone, each trying to sound like the only truth. Now let's validate this with lived experience. Have you ever replayed an argument in your head and noticed how your position seems to shift depending on which thought dominates? One moment you feel absolutely sure you were right. The next moment, the doubt creeps in, and you feel the other side has a point. That flop is not indecisiveness or weakness. It is rivalry. Your mind is not broken when it does this. It is following the same competitive structure that runs your perception. And here is the strange comfort in that. If you have ever felt like you cannot quiet your thoughts, like your brain is a battlefield of opposing voices, it is not because you are uniquely scattered. It is because that is how the system was designed. Rivalry is not an accident of vision. It is a principle of consciousness. Conflict is not the exception. It is the rule. This also helps explain why people struggle with decisions that feel simple on the surface. Even choosing what to eat can feel like an exhausting back and forth, because your brain is not hosting a peaceful council of thoughts. It is running a rivalry where only one gets the spotlight at a time. That back and forth is baked into the machinery of choice. The same rivalry that flips red and green flips your thoughts about staying or leaving, trusting or doubting, saying yes or saying no. And this is where it gets interesting. Just like suppressed images in rivalry can still influence your behavior, suppressed thoughts do not disappear. They may not dominate your awareness, but they keep whispering beneath the surface. That is why an intrusive thought can feel so persistent. Even when it is not in the spotlight, it waits in the background, ready to surge forward again. The rivalry never ends. So here is the tease. If your inner world works like rivalry, with thoughts competing for dominance and only one reaching awareness at a time, then who exactly is the you in control? Are you the referee choosing which thought to host, or are you simply the stage where the strongest thought takes over? And if that is true, then maybe what you call your decisions, your beliefs, even your personality, are nothing more than the current winner of an endless rivalry happening behind the curtain. Rivalry-inspired VR experiences. Imagine putting on a VR headset and finding yourself inside two worlds at once. In one eye you see a serene forest. In the other, a bustling city street. The headset is forcing your brain to live out binocular rivalry in real time. You think VR is about immersion, about pulling you into one convincing reality, but rivalry-inspired VR experiences flip that expectation. They show you what it feels like to have reality itself break into pieces. And here is the shocking part. Most VR aims to trick your senses into believing in one seamless world. Rivalry-based VR does the opposite. It highlights the instability of perception. It gives you a taste of what your brain is already doing every moment, hiding half of what it sees and letting the other half dominate. Inside these experiences, you watch your vision switch back and forth. Forest, city, forest, city. You cannot control it. The world changes without your permission. It is unsettling, almost dreamlike, and it makes you realize how fragile your sense of reality really is. Think about how strange that is. When you play a normal VR game, you expect the environment to stay consistent. You expect the rules of physics to hold. But Rivalry-inspired VR deliberately destabilizes you. It throws two realities into the ring and lets your brain wrestle with them. One wins, then the other. You do not get a blend. You get alternating slices of reality stitched together by your awareness. It is like being inside a lucid dream where the scenery refuses to stay put. Now here is the validation. If you have ever wondered why VR feels so powerful, it is because it taps into the same rivalry principle that already governs perception. Even in everyday life, your brain chooses what to emphasize and what to suppress. VR just exaggerates that mechanism, putting you in a position where the flips are undeniable. Instead of trusting that your brain has created a stable world, you are forced to notice that the world you experience is always constructed, always edited. Designers have started experimenting with this. Some VR art installations use rival images to make you feel like you are walking through two overlapping realities. One step feels solid, the next feels like it dissolves. You are never quite sure which version of the environment is real. This is not a glitch. It is the point. It lets you feel firsthand how consciousness negotiates conflicting inputs. It transforms a neuroscience experiment into an existential experience. And this is where VR becomes more than entertainment. Rivalry-inspired VR is not about winning a game or escaping into a fantasy. It is about confronting the instability of perception itself. When your brain flips between two worlds, you realize how easily your sense of self and reality can be manipulated. You realize that consciousness is not a steady camera recording the truth. It is more like a director cutting between different scenes and hoping you do not notice the edits. Here is a way to picture it. Imagine walking through a VR museum where every exhibit is split. In one eye, you see a painting of a peaceful landscape. In the other, the same landscape consumed by fire. Your awareness flips between serenity and destruction. You do not get both at once. You live inside one reality, then the other. That is not just a visual trick. It is a way of experiencing how divided human perception really is. And this makes sense of something deeper. If you have ever felt like you live in two worlds at once, the outer world of appearances and the inner world of thoughts, VR rivalry experiences capture that feeling. They make the invisible rivalry of consciousness visible. They externalize the battle, turning it into something you can see, feel, and be unsettled by. It validates that your sense of dividedness is not just in your head. It is built into perception itself. But here is the tease. If VR can replicate rivalry, if it can split your perception into competing realities and make you feel the instability of consciousness, then what does that mean for the future of virtual worlds? Will VR remain an escape into stable fantasy, or will it become a tool to show us the fault lines of reality itself? And if rivalry can be simulated and amplified through technology, then how long before we use VR not just to play games, but to explore the deepest question of all? Whether the reality we trust outside the headset is any more stable than the ones inside it. Using binocular rivalry in art installations, picture yourself walking into an art gallery where nothing is stable. You put on a special headset, and suddenly one eye sees a sculpture glowing with light, while the other sees it slowly melting into shadow. Your vision cannot hold both. It flips back and forth, like the artwork is alive, shifting with every blink. That is binocular rivalry turned into art. Instead of hanging still images on a wall, Artists are hijacking perception itself, turning your brain into the canvas. And here is the shocking part. Traditional art tries to guide your attention toward one coherent perspective. Rivalry art does the opposite. It refuses coherence. It puts two realities in front of you and forces your brain to choose. Then switch again. The art does not live in the headset, or on the sculpture, or in the projection. The art lives inside your mind, in the constant battle for awareness. You are no longer just looking at art. You are participating in the instability of perception itself. Think of how radical that is. For centuries, artists have used tricks like perspective, shading, and illusion to manipulate your eyes. But rivalry installations push further. They make you feel the act of seeing as unstable. 1 second you are standing in a room of color. The next it collapses into grayscale. One moment you see a face, then it morphs into an entirely different identity. Your awareness keeps flipping, and the piece reveals itself not as one image, but as the tension between images. This is not just a gimmick. Rivalry installations force you to confront the fact that reality is not given, it is constructed. The flipping is not a bug in the artwork, it is the mechanism. It makes you realize that what you call your stable world is already the result of hidden competitions happening in your brain every second. The gallery simply exaggerates the battle so you cannot ignore it. Now let's validate this with lived experience. If you have ever stared at an optical illusion and felt your perception suddenly change, you already know the thrill. Rivalry art takes that spark of surprise and stretches it into an entire environment. It validates that seeing is not passive. It is active. It is fragile. And in that fragility lies beauty. By splitting your vision, the artist hands you the role of co-creator. You finish the piece in your mind, stitching the alternations into your own private experience. Imagine walking into a room where one eye sees a forest in full bloom, while the other sees the same forest in winter. You cannot experience both seasons at once. You live inside the flip, the sensation of time passing back and forth. Or imagine a VR gallery where one eye shows you a crowded city and the other an empty desert. As your awareness switches, you feel what it is like to inhabit two completely different worlds. The rivalry is not just visual. It becomes emotional. Each flip feels like a shift in your inner state, and here is what makes it powerful. These installations remind you that art does not have to live on the surface. It can live in the very mechanics of your brain. You are not just looking at something external. You are watching your own consciousness perform. The beauty is not on the wall. The beauty is in the moment when your awareness jumps, when you feel your mind betray its own promise of stability. This also explains why rivalry art resonates with people who crave more than decoration. It is not about creating something pretty to look at. It is about creating an encounter with perception itself. The piece asks you to notice how unstable you are, how divided you are, how fleeting each version of reality feels. That experience lingers long after you leave the gallery, because you realize the rivalry never stops. The world you see outside is just another edit, another winner in the endless competition for awareness. But here is the tease. If artists can already harness rivalry to split your perception and turn your brain into the canvas, what comes next? What happens when these installations stop being confined to galleries and move into everyday spaces? Imagine public art that flips between two realities depending on which eye you use. Imagine performances where reality itself becomes unstable by design. If Rivalry can already transform art into a direct dialogue with your consciousness, maybe the future of creativity is not just about what we see, but about how unstable seeing can be. Cinematic techniques that mimic rivalry. Think about the last time you were pulled into a movie so deeply that you felt torn between two realities. Maybe it was a scene where two timelines overlapped, or two characters' perspectives were cut together so quickly you could not decide which one to believe. That feeling of being suspended between worlds is not accidental. It is cinema borrowing from the same principles as binocular rivalry. Directors have discovered that if you want to capture the chaos of the mind, you do not need to explain it in dialogue. You show it by splitting perception. And here is the shocking part. Film is supposed to give you one coherent viewpoint. The camera becomes your eye, and everything is built to feel seamless. But when filmmakers want you to feel divided, they break that rule. They cut rapidly between shots, overlay images, distort sound, or use double exposures. These techniques trick your awareness into flipping the same way it flips in Rivalry. You are never allowed to settle. One image dominates, then it collapses, then another surges forward. It feels disorienting because it is literally pulling your perception into a battle. Take quick, cut editing as an example. You see one reality, then the next, then back again, so fast that your brain cannot fuse them. It has to pick which one feels dominant in that moment. Or consider when two images are superimposed, like a face dissolving into another. Your awareness flickers between them, never able to hold both fully. That is rivalry on the screen. Your eyes are open, but your mind is choosing which picture to privilege. And this is not just technical trickery. It is emotional storytelling. Think of moments in cinema where a character is facing an impossible decision. The editing becomes fragmented, the sound distorted, the camera angle switching violently. That is not just for drama. It is a way of letting you feel the rivalry inside their mind. Two conflicting thoughts, two possible futures, alternating until one finally takes hold. The form of the film mirrors the form of consciousness. Now let's validate this with an everyday example. Have you ever watched a suspense sequence where you are cutting between the villain sneaking closer and the hero completely unaware? Back and forth, shot by shot, until your pulse races. That is not just suspense. That is rivalry built into the edit. Your awareness keeps flipping, villain then hero, danger then safety, until you can barely hold both together. The tension lives in that alternation. Without the rivalry, the scene would fall flat. Filmmakers know that humans cannot process two conflicting images at once. So they design sequences that deliberately overload you, forcing the same kind of switching your brain does naturally. Even the use of split screens or layered soundscapes. Two voices talking at once, two songs colliding, puts you in a rivalry state. You cannot focus on both equally. Your awareness dances back and forth, and the film uses that instability as a tool. This explains why certain experimental films feel so unsettling. They strip away the comfortable illusion of one continuous world and confront you with competing realities. You walk out of the theater not entirely sure what you saw, because your brain was busy resolving conflicts the entire time. Rivalry has been embedded into the language of cinema without most people realizing it. And there is something deeper here. These techniques remind us that movies are not just stories. They are manipulations of consciousness. When you sit in the dark and give yourself to the screen, you are handing over the spotlight of your awareness to someone else. The director decides when to flip it, when to let one image dominate, when to yank it away. Rivalry in cinema is not just about visuals. It is about control. The same way your brain decides which image you see in Rivalry, the filmmaker decides which reality you experience in film. But here is where it gets interesting. Rivalry in cinema is not always used to create fear or confusion. Sometimes it is used to create beauty. Think of dream sequences where two images slowly overlap. A character asleep in bed while drifting through a surreal landscape. You cannot see both clearly at once, so your awareness shifts gently, like waves. The result is a poetic kind of rivalry where you feel suspended between waking and dreaming. The conflict becomes a form of art. And that leads to the tease. If cinema already uses rivalry techniques to manipulate our awareness, what happens as technology evolves? What happens when VR films, interactive stories, or AI-generated media can simulate true binocular rivalry, forcing your eyes to live in two worlds at once? Will cinema remain a window into one reality, or will it become a rivalry machine, splitting and stitching your perception until the very idea of a single viewpoint collapses? The psychology of visual competition. You probably think of vision as this smooth, reliable stream of information. You open your eyes, and the world simply appears. But under the surface, perception is not calm at all. It is a battleground. Your brain is constantly receiving more information than it can handle, and every image, every detail, every motion is fighting for survival. Only a fraction of what reaches your eyes makes it into awareness. That is the psychology of visual competition. It is not just that your brain filters the noise. It is that everything you see is competing in a psychological tournament for your attention. And here is the part that surprises most people. Your brain does not show you everything at once because that would overwhelm you. Instead, it suppresses most inputs and lets a few dominate. Binocular rivalry is the clearest example. Two images enter. Only one makes it to the spotlight. The other does not disappear. It is just silenced, buried beneath awareness. That competition is happening constantly, not just when scientists set up rivalry experiments. It is how vision works by default. You are only ever conscious of the winner, never the struggle. Think about walking into a crowded cafe. Hundreds of faces, moving bodies, flashing screens, words on signs, reflections in glass. All of it lands on your eyes at once, but your brain cannot give you the whole flood. So what happens? One person's face stands out, a hand gesture draws you in. A coffee cup, steaming, locks your focus. That is not luck. That is competition. Your visual system is staging a battle between signals, and your awareness is awarded to the victor. And this gets even more interesting. The psychology of this competition is not neutral. Your brain cheats. It biases the contest. Stronger, more contrast, heavy images win. Moving objects tend to dominate over still ones. Emotional or threatening cues, like someone suddenly standing too close, leap to the front of the line. This is not random, it is survival. Your brain is wired to privilege the signals that matter most for staying alive. The cafe example is just the soft version. The same mechanism keeps you alive on a busy street or in the middle of danger. But here is where the shock sets in. The things you are not aware of, the losers of the competition, do not just vanish. Studies have shown that suppressed images in rivalry can still affect your emotions and decisions. A threatening face that your brain hides from awareness can still make your body tense. A flashing word suppressed in rivalry can still prime your thoughts. So even when you think you are seeing everything that matters, Your unconscious is carrying the traces of the losers. Visual competition does not just shape what you see. It quietly shapes how you feel and act even when you are blind to it. Now let's validate this with everyday life. Think of driving a car. You are flooded with signals. The motion of cars beside you, the lights ahead, the scenery sliding past. You cannot process it all, so your brain gives you the lane in front of you and the car just behind your mirror. Everything else is pushed aside. If you have ever been startled by something that seemed to come out of nowhere, a pedestrian, a cyclist, it did not actually come out of nowhere. It was there, in the losing pile of signals your brain suppressed. That moment when it surges into awareness is the moment the competition shifts. Something new has taken the crown. This is what makes visual competition so central to psychology. It shows us that perception is not a passive recording. It is an active process of selection, suppression, and rivalry. Your world is not the world. It is the version your brain has decided is useful. And once you realize that, you start to notice how often your sense of reality is really just the outcome of a psychological contest you never see. Now here is where it becomes personal. If visual competition governs what we notice, then it also governs what we miss. How many times have you been so focused on your phone that you did not notice someone trying to get your attention? How many times have you walked through a familiar street and failed to see the new sign or the subtle changes? It is not that those things were invisible. They lost the competition. The psychology of rivalry explains why you are blind to half your life, even with your eyes wide open. And here is the tease. If your vision is always filtered through this competition, what does that mean for your sense of truth? If two people can look at the same scene and focus on completely different details, then which reality is real? Visual competition does not just determine what you see. It hints at how fragile perception is, how easy it is for two minds to inhabit different worlds even when they share the same space. And if awareness is only ever the winner of a hidden tournament, then maybe the question is not what you see, but what you are never seeing. Audience perception during extended rivalry. Imagine staring at an image that refuses to settle. One eye is seeing a calm ocean, the other is seeing fire. For the first few seconds, it feels playful. Your awareness flips back and forth, like someone is clicking a switch in your mind. But stay with it longer. Not seconds, not minutes, but half an hour, even more. What starts out as a little curiosity experiment becomes something entirely different. Extended rivalry does not just split your vision. It begins to split your experience of time, self, and reality. And here is where the shock comes in. Your brain is not built for endless instability. It craves coherence, one stable reality at a time. So when you stretch rivalry into hours, the experience grows heavier. At first the switches are sharp and distinct. Ocean, fire, ocean, fire. But after a while, you start to notice blends. Moments where the two images leak into each other, forming ghostly combinations your brain normally suppresses. Extended rivalry exposes what the short version hides, the messy middle zone, where your brain is struggling, where the battle is not cleanly won. Psychologists who have studied this know that long rivalry changes perception. People report a shift in awareness, almost like drifting into a trance. The steady alternations begin to feel less like interruptions and more like waves. And that has a profound effect on audience perception. Instead of focusing on the images themselves, you become hyper-aware of the act of perceiving. You start noticing how strange it is that one moment reality is one thing, and the next it is something else. The art or the experiment stops being about the content and becomes about the instability itself. This is why extended rivalry experiences, whether in a lab or in an installation, can feel so personal. When you put an audience into that state, you are not just showing them a visual trick. You are revealing to them the fragility of their own consciousness. People begin to describe feeling detached from normal time. Some say it feels dreamlike, as if reality itself has slowed down. Others describe an almost meditative calm, because their attention has nothing to hold on to except the switching itself. The effect is unpredictable. One person may feel anxious, another may feel euphoric, but both are left with the sense that ordinary vision is not as stable as they thought. And that validates something important. Extended rivalry is not just about vision. It is about endurance, not of the eyes, but of awareness. Audiences discover their own thresholds. How long can you live inside uncertainty before your mind starts reshaping it? Some try to fight it, clinging to one image, forcing their focus. Others let go and float with the alternations. That choice itself becomes part of the experience. It shows you how perception is not passive. It is something you participate in, even when the rules are stacked against you. Think about how rare that is. Most of the time, audiences, whether in a theater, a gallery, or a VR space, expect stability. A movie unfolds shot by shot. An artwork hangs unchanged on a wall. But rivalry throws out that contract. It refuses to be stable, and when you extend it, the audience cannot escape the instability. It is not something happening out there on the screen. It is happening in here, in their own heads. The artwork becomes a mirror for their tolerance of ambiguity, and this matters because ambiguity is not just an artistic idea. It is a psychological reality. Life itself is full of competing signals, mixed messages, conflicting identities. Extended rivalry takes that abstract truth and makes you feel it directly. Audiences walk away realizing they have lived inside an hour-long metaphor for uncertainty. They felt the way the mind resists it, then slowly adapts. That is not just a perceptual experiment. That is a training ground for how to live in a world that rarely offers clarity. But here is the tease. If extended rivalry can push audiences into these altered states of awareness, what else could it do? What if future performances or films deliberately built hours long rivalry into their design, not as a gimmick, but as a way of reshaping consciousness? What if museums or digital platforms offered rivalry as an endurance experience, where you are not just watching art, but testing the limits of your own perception? If a few minutes can shift how people see reality, imagine what 3 hours, 6 hours, or even a full day might unlock. Rivalry in surrealist painting traditions. When you first stand in front of a surrealist painting, it rarely gives itself away all at once. You stare at the canvas, and your brain keeps asking, what am I really looking at? One moment you see a familiar object, the next it dissolves into something entirely different. A face becomes a landscape, a shadow becomes an animal. The entire image flips under your gaze. That feeling is not an accident. Surrealist painters were masters of forcing rivalry into art long before psychologists had the term for it. And here is the shocking truth. These artists were not just trying to paint strange dreamscapes for the sake of shock value. They were deliberately exploiting the fact that your mind cannot hold two conflicting interpretations at the same time. They knew that if you pack a single canvas with competing realities, the viewer's awareness will flicker back and forth, much like binocular rivalry. You never settle into one coherent reading. Instead, you live inside the instability where perception itself feels unreliable. Look at Salvador Dali, for instance. His paintings are filled with double images: a woman who is also a vase, a mountain range that doubles as a reclining figure, shadows that suddenly form another world. He once described his work as hand-painted dream photographs. But what makes them so powerful is not just their dreamlike content. It is the rivalry they provoke in your mind. You see one interpretation, then the other, back and forth, each fighting to dominate. The art does not sit still on the wall. It wrestles inside your consciousness. And this is what validates the surrealist project. Their entire mission was to expose the unconscious, to reveal the hidden layers of reality beneath rational order. Rivalry is the perfect psychological tool for that. By forcing two incompatible images into the same frame, the painting denies you the comfort of a single answer. You become aware of the competition between interpretations, and in that tension, something unconscious seeps through. It feels dreamlike because dreams operate in the same unstable territory, where one image melts into another without resolution. Think about how different this is from traditional art. A Renaissance portrait offers you clarity. You know what you are seeing, and the painting confirms it again and again. Surrealism refuses clarity. It throws you into rivalry. That is why audiences often report feeling unsettled, even disturbed, in front of these works. The brain wants to stabilize perception, but the painting won't allow it. Instead, you are caught in perpetual alternation, as if your own consciousness has become part of the artwork. And if you pay close attention, you will notice something strange happening inside yourself while viewing surrealist art. The longer you stare, the more fluid your awareness becomes. At first you might resist, insisting that one reading is the real one. But after a while, you accept the switching. You begin to enjoy the instability, to lean into the ambiguity. That shift mirrors exactly what happens in extended binocular rivalry experiments. The audience adapts, finding a strange calm in the flux. Surrealist paintings achieved that decades before scientists could put rivalry under a microscope. This is why these works still feel so modern. In a world obsessed with clarity and sharp lines, surrealism reminds us that perception is not fixed. It is contested. Rivalry in their paintings is not just a trick of perspective. It is a statement about consciousness itself. You are never seeing the whole truth at once. You are always toggling between fragments, stitching together a reality that feels whole but never really is. Now let's pull this into the personal. Imagine walking through a gallery and stopping in front of a magritte. At first it looks like a simple pipe or a cleanly rendered figure. But then the contradiction sets in. The words, the impossible scale, the image that means more than one thing at once. You can feel your mind slipping between interpretations. That flicker is not a flaw in the artwork. It is the art. Magritte and Dali and their contemporaries were inviting you to experience rivalry directly, to realize that the conflict is not outside you, it is inside your perception. And here is the tease. If surrealist painters could mimic rivalry on a flat canvas, what happens when future artists use new tools? Digital, interactive, immersive, to create images that truly compete in real time. What happens when art no longer suggests rivalry, but induces it with the same power as a scientific experiment? The surrealists opened the door by showing us that a single painting could split perception. The question now is how far that door can swing open, and whether the art of the future might not just depict dreams, but put us directly inside the rivalry of the mind. Revelry as an aesthetic in glitch art. Glitch art grabs you in a way that polished images never can. You are scrolling through perfect photos, flawless videos, crisp graphics, and then suddenly a broken frame jumps out. Pixels bleed, colors stutter, forms overlap. At first, it looks like an error, something that should not be there. But that is exactly why you cannot look away. Glitch art thrives on rivalry. It forces your perception to wrestle with competing signals, the image as it should be, and the image as it is, fractured and unstable. Here is where it gets surprising. When you stare at glitch art, you are not just seeing a digital mistake. You are experiencing something almost identical to binocular rivalry. Two conflicting realities fight for dominance inside your awareness. Part of your brain is trying to resolve the image, to reconstruct the missing or broken elements. Another part of your brain is fixated on the noise, the distortion, the parts that do not fit. Your perception flickers back and forth. It is the same dance your mind performs when shown two different pictures at once. Glitch art turns a technical malfunction into an aesthetic of rivalry. And that is what makes it so compelling. Humans are wired to crave order, to make sense of what they see. When an image glitches, it denies you that resolution. The eye keeps searching, the brain keeps guessing, and that tension creates fascination. You cannot settle into comfort because the visual system itself is unsettled. Glitch art gives you the experience of instability without ever naming it. You feel the alternation in your gut. It is not just seeing, it is perceiving conflict. What validates glitch art as more than just broken pixels is how audiences respond. When artists first began presenting corrupted files, data mushing, and distorted videos as art, critics dismissed it as novelty. But people kept staring. They felt something alive in those fractured signals, and psychologists can explain why. Rivalry holds attention longer than stability. Your brain hates unsolved conflicts, so it keeps returning, keeps checking, keeps trying to stitch the image together. That persistence is exactly what artists aim for. By keeping you in that suspended state of rivalry, glitch art transforms error into aesthetic power. You can see this especially in moving glitch art. Videos that pulse with compression artifacts, colors misaligned, faces melting in and out of recognition. The brain does not know whether to accept the person it half recognizes or the distortion breaking it apart. That flicker between recognition and breakdown is a perceptual struggle you feel moment by moment. It is the same way your awareness flips between rival images in a lab experiment. The only difference is that in glitch art, the instability is built into the artwork itself. And there is something poetic about that. Rivalry in glitch art is not just about perception. It mirrors the instability of modern life. The digital world promises seamless perfection, yet underneath it is messy code, fragile networks, vulnerable systems. Every glitch is a reminder that what looks unified is actually fractured. That is why glitch art resonates. It turns technological error into a metaphor for divided consciousness, fractured identity, and the impossibility of total control. Think about how often you have seen a corrupted photo of someone important to you. Maybe their face was smeared across the screen, half missing, half there. You could not stop looking, not because it was beautiful, but because it captured something true. That duality, the presence and the absence, the signal and the noise, is the same psychological mechanism as rivalry. Your awareness cannot settle, so it hovers between interpretations, creating a haunting emotional weight. Glitch art uses that instability not to annoy, but to awaken. And here is where it becomes personal for the audience. If rivalry in surrealist painting exposed the unconscious, rivalry in glitch art exposes the digital unconscious. All the things we are not supposed to see: compression flaws, corrupted files, invisible scaffolds of data, are pushed to the surface. The conflict between clean and broken becomes the whole point. When you watch glitch art long enough, you stop seeing an accident. You start seeing a system laid bare, a network revealing its bones. The rivalry becomes less about what is on screen and more about the awareness that you are witnessing two realities colliding: the polished surface and the hidden machinery underneath. So here is the tease. If glitch art has already turned rivalry into an aesthetic, what happens when new media push it further? What happens when VR, AR, or AI-driven art begins to deliberately simulate rivalry in real time? Not just through errors, but through intentional conflicts in perception. Imagine an artwork that constantly feeds you two incompatible digital realities, forcing your brain to toggle endlessly between them. Glitch art planted the seed by embracing error. The next generation could grow it into a fully designed experience of rivalry, where instability is not a bug, but the entire canvas. Revelry and meditation states sit with this for a second. Imagine focusing on your breath during meditation. At first, your awareness drifts all over the place. Thoughts intrude, sensations tug for attention, and the mind flickers between focus and distraction. Now picture that same tug of war, not with thoughts, but with vision itself. One eye sees one image, the other eye sees another, and your awareness bounces back and forth. That is binocular rivalry. And in a strange way, it is not so different from what meditators have been describing for thousands of years. Here is the surprising part. Rivalry looks chaotic from the outside, like the brain cannot make up its mind. But when you stay inside it long enough, a shift happens. The instability stops feeling like noise and starts feeling like rhythm. You realize that perception itself is always moving, always pulsing, and the rivalry simply makes that movement obvious. That shift is uncannily close to what meditation practitioners call observing the mind. When you sit and watch thoughts rise and fall without clinging to them, you are practicing a kind of mental rivalry. Attention flickers, and instead of fighting it, you watch it. Psychologists who study meditation have noticed that long-term practitioners describe moments of awareness that sound almost identical to what people report during extended rivalry. The sense of time loosens. The boundaries between observer and experience blur. You become aware not of one stable image, but of the process of perception itself. In meditation, this is framed as insight. In rivalry, it emerges from the visual conflict. But the underlying state feels strangely similar. A mind that is watching itself oscillate. And here is where it gets validating. Rivalry shows that meditation is not about shutting the mind off or forcing a blank slate. It is about learning to live inside shifting awareness without panic. Most beginners in meditation struggle because they think thoughts should stop. When they keep coming, they feel like they are failing. But rivalry demonstrates that fluctuation is the baseline. Consciousness is not unified, it is alternating. The skill is not eliminating the alternation. The skill is relaxing into it, letting the switches come and go without grasping. Rivalry makes the invisible visible, giving us a direct window into how attention naturally flickers. Think about the body's reaction too. Extended rivalry often produces states of calm detachment. Instead of frustration, people report a kind of surrender, a quiet curiosity about what image will appear next. That is exactly what meditation training encourages, shifting from control to observation. The meditator learns to say, "Here comes a thought, and now it is gone, and here comes another." In Rivalry, the thought is replaced by competing visuals, but the lesson is the same. You are not in charge of the switch, but you can choose how you relate to it. This link opens up a fascinating possibility. What if Rivalry could be used as a tool to train meditative awareness? Instead of sitting on a cushion and wrestling with thoughts, what if you put on goggles and were shown two competing images for an hour? Your brain would be forced to confront instability directly, and you could practice non-attachment in real time. It would be meditation made visible. The mind would learn to relax into flux because the flux is undeniable. And this is not just speculation. Meditation research has already shown that attention flickers naturally, cycling in rhythms we usually overlook. Rivalry amplifies those rhythms, so we cannot ignore them. When an experienced meditator sits with Rivalry, they often describe the same qualities as when they sit with their breath: openness, fluidity, and sometimes even a dissolving of the boundary between self and stimulus. Rivalry and meditation both strip away the illusion of stability, revealing that consciousness is not a steady flame but a flickering one. Imagine leading a meditation class not with silence, but with a Rivalry exercise. Instead of closing your eyes, you open them to conflict. You let the brain show you its alternating pattern, and you breathe with it. That could reshape how people understand practice. Instead of thinking calm equals stillness, they might realize calm equals acceptance of change. That lesson could ripple far beyond meditation cushions into daily life. When conflicts arise between decisions, emotions, identities, you could remember the Rivalry exercise and know that awareness can hold shifting states without collapsing. And here is the tease. If Rivalry can simulate the very instability meditators spend years learning to embrace, what does that mean for the future of contemplative practice? Could science and ancient tradition merge, using visual conflict as a shortcut to insight? Could Rivalry become not just a lab phenomenon or an art experience, but a doorway into altered states usually reserved for monks and long-term practitioners? The possibility is sitting right in front of us. Rivalry shows that perception is never unified, and meditation shows that peace is possible even within that lack of unity. The two together might be pointing toward a new way of training the mind, where vision itself becomes the path to stillness. Rivalry with faces versus objects. You are looking through a Rivalry experiment. One eye sees a human face, the other eye sees a simple object. Maybe a chair, maybe a house. Both images are present, but only one makes it into awareness at a time. And here is where it gets interesting. Your brain is not neutral in this fight. The face tends to win. That might not sound shocking at first, but think about what that means. The brain is built to prioritize faces so strongly that even when given equal input, it tips the balance. Rivalry does not play out as a fair contest. Faces pull awareness toward themselves again and again, pushing the object into the background. The rules of competition bend in favor of whatever looks most human. And that says something profound about us. Faces are not just another category of image. They are hardwired triggers. From birth, humans show preference for face-like patterns. Tiny infants turn toward anything with two eyes and a mouth. Our survival depends on it. A face tells you if someone is friend or threat, if they are angry, loving, or indifferent. Missing that signal could mean missing danger or connection. So when the brain is forced into Rivalry, It treats faces as VIPs of perception. Here is the validating piece. Studies consistently show that rivalry durations are skewed when faces are involved. People see the face more often, for longer stretches, and with quicker recovery after suppression. Even famous faces, or emotional expressions, have an even stronger pull. It is like the brain cannot help but cheat the system to keep faces in view. And this is not just a quirky lab result. It lines up with everyday life. Walk into a crowded room, and your eyes scan faces before they notice furniture. Scroll through a page, and faces grab your attention faster than any object. Rivalry simply makes the bias visible. Now let's make it more personal. Imagine being in conversation with someone while glancing at your phone. Both streams of input compete for attention. The person's face pulls harder because your brain knows faces carry more emotional weight. That is everyday rivalry at play. The object may be important, but the face is urgent. This priority system shapes every decision we make about where to look and what to notice. And the effect gets even more powerful when emotions are added. A neutral chair can never compete with an angry face glaring back at you. A smiling face can hold your awareness longer than a blank wall ever could. Rivalry shows us that attention is not just about clarity of image. It is about meaning, about survival, about connection. Faces are loaded with meaning in ways objects will never be. But there is a shadow side to this. If faces dominate awareness in rivalry, what happens when the brain cannot process them correctly? People with conditions like prosopagnosia or face blindness often report unusual rivalry patterns. They cannot recognize the face as significant, so the object may compete more equally. That reveals how much of this bias is not just about the eyes, but about higher level processing. Recognition fuels dominance. If recognition is broken, the whole rivalry dynamic changes. And this leads to an even more fascinating idea. Rivalry might be a window into how empathy itself works. If we are drawn so strongly to faces, it could mean our awareness is tuned to prioritize other people over things. Objects matter, but people matter more. Rivalry simply makes that hierarchy visible in the lab. It tells us that perception is not a flat playing field. It is tilted toward humanity, toward emotion, toward social meaning. Now imagine the artistic or technological implications. In virtual reality, what if the system wants to guarantee your attention lands on a certain element? All it has to do is mask it with a face, and your awareness will snap toward it. In art, surrealist paintings often merge faces with objects, playing on this bias. You cannot help but see the face first, even when the object is equally present. Rivalry explains why those illusions hit so deeply. And here is the tease. If rivalry exposes how faces dominate perception, what does that say about a future filled with artificial faces? Deepfakes, digital avatars, AI companions, all will be competing with real human faces for our attention. And given what rivalry shows us, they may win more often than we expect, because the brain does not care whether the face is real or fake. It only cares that it looks human. The next frontier of rivalry may not be faces versus objects, but real versus artificial faces, each fighting for dominance in the theater of our awareness. Rivalry as a window into consciousness. Think about this for a moment. You open your eyes and the world feels seamless. One picture, one reality. Everything flowing together in unity, but rivalry cracks that illusion wide open. When each eye is fed a different image, your awareness does not blend them into one. It flips between them. A face here, a house there, never both at once, and suddenly you realize something unsettling. The consciousness you thought was unified is actually fractured, stitched together moment by moment. Here is the shocking part. Rivalry is not about the eyes failing to merge signals. It is about the mind making choices. Consciousness itself is revealed to be selective. Two inputs are available, yet you only experience one. That means your conscious awareness is not a mirror of reality. It is a spotlight, shining on one image while leaving the other in darkness. Rivalry pulls back the curtain and shows us the spotlight in action. Without it, you might never question the illusion of seamlessness. And that illusion runs deep. Every second, your brain was bombarded with far more data than you could possibly process. Sounds, textures, smells, emotions, memories. You cannot be aware of it all, so consciousness edits. It chooses what enters your stage and what gets hidden behind the curtains. Rivalry gives us a rare chance to see the editing process directly. Two competing inputs stand before you, but only one makes it into the play. The other is suppressed, not because it disappeared, but because consciousness chose to ignore it. That is why scientists treat rivalry as a window into consciousness itself. Most of the time, you cannot tell what your brain is hiding. In rivalry, you can. You know both images are present. You know your eyes are working. Yet you only experience one. The switch from one to the other is like a flashlight beam turning across a dark room, revealing only one corner at a time. This is consciousness exposed in its raw form, limited, fluctuating, selective. Now let's validate this with what we know from psychology. Experiments show that even when an image is suppressed during rivalry, the brain continues to process it unconsciously. For example, if one eye is shown a threatening face and the other eye sees a neutral object, the face might be suppressed from awareness. But your body still reacts. Your pupils dilate, your heartbeat may quicken, your amygdala fires. That means the information is there, alive in the brain, but hidden from your awareness. Rivalry makes it impossible to deny that consciousness is only a small fraction of mental life. The rest hums along unseen. And here is where it gets personal. Rivalry forces you to confront how little control you actually have. You cannot decide to see both images at once. You cannot force one to stay dominant forever. Your awareness flickers beyond your command. It is humbling, even unsettling, to realize the very thing you identify as yourself, your conscious experience, is not fully in your control. Rivalry exposes the machinery behind the curtain. It shows you that the self you feel is riding atop deeper processes, not driving them. But it is not all unsettling. Rivalry also gives a kind of clarity. For centuries, philosophers have debated what consciousness is. Is it unified? Is it continuous? Is it stable? Rivalry says no. Consciousness is fractured, discontinuous, flickering. Yet in that instability, there is a strange kind of beauty. You can see directly how the mind constructs reality, moment by moment, decision by decision, spotlight by spotlight. Rivalry gives you the rare chance to not just experience consciousness, but to witness its mechanics. Think of it like watching a movie frame by frame. Normally the projection looks fluid and whole, but rivalry lets you peek between the frames. You see the stutter, the jump, the shift that the mind usually hides. And once you see it, you cannot unsee it. Consciousness is not a continuous stream. It is a dance of selections. Rivalry is the lens that lets us watch the dance. And that leads us to the tease. If rivalry reveals the spotlight of awareness, what else could we learn by studying these switches? Could we eventually map the hidden rules your brain uses to decide what gets in and what stays out? Could rivalry become the key to decoding not just perception, but the very essence of conscious experience? Because if you want to know what consciousness is made of, Rivalry offers the rarest gift, a direct, living window into the construction of your own awareness. What Binocular Rivalry reveals about depth perception: close one eye and the world looks flat. Open both and suddenly depth appears. Space stretches, and objects feel anchored in 3 dimensions. We take that magic for granted, but Binocular Rivalry puts cracks in the illusion. Instead of blending the 2 images into depth, the brain flips between them, and that tells us something we rarely think about. Depth is not a given, it is a fragile construction. Here is the shocking part. Your eyes are always sending different views of the world. They are never perfectly aligned. One eye catches more of the left, the other more of the right. Normally, the brain fuses them into a single rich 3D picture. But Rivalry shows that this fusion is not guaranteed. If the images are too different, the brain gives up. It stops building depth and starts alternating between flat pictures. That is a reminder that depth is not out there in the world. It is created inside your mind, and it can vanish in an instant. Now let's slow this down and validate it. Depth perception depends on tiny differences between the eyes called disparities. The brain usually handles these effortlessly, combining the left and right signals into a stereoscopic image. That is how you can judge distances, catch a ball, or thread a needle. But Rivalry reveals the fragility of the system. When the 2 eyes see images that cannot be reconciled, the brain does not blend them. It suppresses one and highlights the other. Depth collapses. You are left not with a unified 3D world, but with a fight for dominance. And this collapse teaches us something important. The feeling of depth you experience every moment is not just a raw sensation. It is a negotiation. The brain is constantly asking, do these 2 images match closely enough to fuse? If yes, depth emerges. If no, Rivalry takes over. In other words, depth perception and Rivalry are 2 sides of the same coin. One is the triumph of fusion, the other the failure. Both reveal how dependent you are on the brain's hidden arbitration. Think about how this plays out in everyday life. When you watch a 3D movie with special glasses, each eye receives a slightly different image. The brain fuses them into depth, and the screen comes alive. But if the images are misaligned, even slightly, the fusion breaks. Instead of depth, you get Rivalry. The left eye's picture dominates, then the right, leaving you disoriented. What should have been immersive turns into a tug of war. The difference between breathtaking 3D and uncomfortable Rivalry is razor thin. It gets even more fascinating when you realize the brain does not give up easily. During Rivalry, there are moments of partial fusion when bits of one image leak into the other. Your perception of depth sometimes flickers back in, only to be torn away again. These unstable moments show just how hard the brain is working to salvage 3D. It is like the visual system is desperate to preserve space, but when the differences are too extreme, it cannot keep the illusion intact. And here is where Rivalry reveals something profound. Depth perception is not about the eyes at all. It is about the brain's decision-making. Even when one image is suppressed, the hidden processing of depth cues continues unconsciously. Studies show that motion, in depth, or the sense that something is coming closer, can still influence behavior even if one eye's image is suppressed from awareness. That means your brain is calculating depth in the background, even when you cannot consciously see it. Rivalry exposes the gap between unconscious computation and conscious experience. Now let's make it personal. Imagine walking through a forest. Your eyes constantly send slightly mismatched images. Most of the time, the brain fuses them seamlessly into a vivid sense of distance between tree trunks, branches, and paths. But Rivalry tells us that if those images were too conflicting, maybe if each eye were fed a totally different forest, you would lose depth completely. You would stumble, disoriented, trapped in a flat, alternating world. The fact that this does not happen in daily life is proof of how astonishingly efficient the brain's fusion system normally is. Rivalry makes you appreciate the miracle of depth. And this also hints at why certain disorders affect spatial awareness so dramatically. People who lose vision in one eye do not simply see less. They lose stereo depth. The world flattens. Rivalry experiments help explain why. Without the ability to fuse, the system defaults to single eye dominance, alternating input rather than blending it. The richness of space disappears. Rivalry shows that depth is not just about having two eyes. It is about the brain's fragile ability to merge their views into a coherent whole. Here is the tease. If Rivalry reveals how precarious depth really is, what happens as we push technology further? Virtual reality, augmented reality, even brain-computer interfaces all rely on tricking the brain into fusing signals into depth. But Rivalry is always lurking in the background, ready to break the spell if the signals are too different. The same mechanism that gives us 3D can also take it away. Rivalry is not just a curiosity. It is the hidden boundary that tells us what depth is, how it works, and how easily it can vanish. The discomfort versus curiosity of Rivalry in media. Imagine you are watching a film and something feels off. One eye is drawn to a glowing figure, the other to a flickering shadow. Your brain cannot hold them both. You feel unsettled, maybe even a little dizzy, yet you cannot look away. That push and pull, discomfort mixed with fascination, is exactly what makes binocular rivalry such a strange tool when it slips into media. It is not pleasant, but it is magnetic. Here is the shocking part. Most forms of media are designed to reduce tension, to smooth over rough edges, to guide your attention so you never feel confused. Rivalry does the opposite. It weaponizes conflict. It forces your perception into a tug-of-war you cannot control. And instead of pushing you away, it lures you deeper. The very thing that makes Rivalry uncomfortable, the instability, the uncertainty, is also what sparks your curiosity. You want to see which image will win, how long it will last, and when the flip will happen again. It becomes addictive precisely because it is unstable. Think of it like this. Horror films use jump scares to trigger fear. Comedies use timing to spark laughter. But Rivalry taps into a deeper reflex. It makes your brain do the work. You are not just consuming content passively. You are caught inside a perceptual battle, and that battle creates its own drama. Each switch feels like a twist in the plot, even if nothing on the screen has changed. The media is not simply showing you a story. It is making your mind perform the story through perception, and this explains why discomfort is not always a bad thing. In fact, discomfort can heighten engagement. When your awareness keeps flipping between two competing images, you lean in. You concentrate harder, trying to hold them both or predict the next switch. The more unsettled you feel, the more curious you become. Rivalry demonstrates one of media's oldest secrets. Tension sustains attention. If everything is stable, you drift. If everything is fractured, you cannot look away. Let's validate this with a familiar example. Think about glitch aesthetics in digital art or experimental film. The image shatters, the audio stutters, and the usual seamless flow is broken. At first it feels uncomfortable, even irritating. But the longer you watch, the more your curiosity grows. What will it break into next? What patterns are hidden in the chaos? Rivalry functions in the same way. The flip between images is like a living glitch inside your perception. It unsettles you, but that very unsettledness hooks you. And notice something even more fascinating. The discomfort of rivalry is not the same as pain. It does not hurt. It unsettles because it exposes the fragility of perception. You suddenly realize that the seamless unity of vision is not guaranteed. Your awareness is flickering, divided, unstable. That realization might feel strange, but it also stirs curiosity. If perception can collapse so easily, what else is fragile? What else is constructed? Revelry turns discomfort into an invitation to explore. Now imagine this in the context of immersive media. A virtual reality artist could deliberately feed each eye different environments. One side a glowing futuristic city, the other a crumbling ruin. The viewer would never experience both fully at once. They would live in the tension between them. Discomfort would drive the feeling of instability, but curiosity would keep them engaged, wanting to know which world their awareness would favor next. This is not storytelling in the traditional sense. It is storytelling through perceptual conflict. And here is why it matters. Media usually tries to control perception, but rivalry media embraces unpredictability. The creator sets up the conflict, then lets the audience's own mind deliver the drama. That means no two viewers experience it the same way. For one, the city might dominate more often. For another, the ruins might hold sway. The discomfort is universal, but the curiosity unfolds uniquely in each person. Rivalry reminds us that media does not just live on the screen. It lives in the interaction between stimulus and perception. There is also a deeper psychological dimension. Rivalry in media echoes the human tendency to be drawn toward what unsettles us. We watch horror not just for fear, but for the relief afterward. We listen to dissonant music not just for tension, but for the resolution when harmony returns. Rivalry does not give us resolution. It denies closure, keeping us locked in alternating states, and yet we stay. Because the very denial of closure keeps curiosity alive. It is a cycle of discomfort feeding fascination. And this leads to the tease. If rivalry can transform discomfort into curiosity in a gallery, a film, or a VR headset, what happens when media begins to use it deliberately? What happens when rivalry becomes not a glitch or an accident, but an aesthetic choice? Could the future of media be built not on clarity and resolution, but on controlled instability? If discomfort can hold your attention just as powerfully as pleasure, then maybe rivalry is not a bug in media. Maybe it is the next frontier. How rivalry relates to multitasking. You are at your desk, a spreadsheet open, an email notification flashing, music playing in the background, and your phone buzzing with a text. You tell yourself you are multitasking, handling it all at once. But what if your brain is not truly multitasking at all? What if it is doing something more like binocular rivalry, flipping between competing inputs, giving dominance to one, suppressing the others, and then switching again? That would mean your ability to juggle tasks is not about doing them all at the same time. It is about rapid alternation. Here is the shocking part. The human brain cannot actually focus on two demanding tasks at once. You can pair an automatic activity, like walking, with a conscious one, like talking. But when two tasks both require real attention, the brain behaves like it does during rivalry. It chooses one, suppresses the other, and then flips. That illusion of multitasking is really a perceptual battle. Just like you cannot see both rivalrous images clearly at the same time, you cannot fully attend to multiple complex tasks simultaneously. Think about how rivalry feels. One image dominates while the other fades. Then, without warning, they switch. That rhythm is eerily similar to the way your attention moves during multitasking. You answer an email, then your focus shifts to the text message, then back to the spreadsheet, each time dropping the suppressed task into the background. For a split second, you might believe you are holding both in awareness, but the brain does not fuse them. It alternates. The myth of multitasking is really the mechanics of rivalry applied to attention, and science backs this up. Research on task switching shows that every time you shift, you pay a cost in performance. Reaction times slow, errors increase, and mental fatigue grows. It is as if the brain's rivalry system has to reset the stage each time it suppresses one task and allows another to dominate. The switching feels seamless, but it is not free. Just like rivalry images fight for dominance, your tasks compete for cognitive resources. There is only so much bandwidth, and your brain resolves conflict by alternating, not by merging. Now let's validate this with something personal. Have you ever tried writing a message while someone is talking to you? You probably noticed you could either write well or listen well, but not both. When you tried to hold them together, you lost the thread of the conversation or misspelled words. That is rivalry in real time. Your brain was not blending two streams of input. It was suppressing one, then the other, and you experienced the cost of the switch. The discomfort you feel in those moments is your awareness hitting the same wall rivalry reveals in vision. And here is the twist. The brain does not seem to mind this instability. In fact, just as rivalry can feel strangely fascinating, multitasking can feel rewarding. Switching between tasks gives tiny hits of novelty. Each new dominance feels fresh, like checking the next message or flipping to a new tab. That is why multitasking can feel productive, even when it is not. The brain craves the flip. Curiosity pulls you into the cycle, just like visual rivalry keeps you watching, waiting for the next perceptual switch. But notice the deeper cost. With binocular rivalry, the brain never delivers a unified image when the inputs are too different. With multitasking, the brain never delivers unified concentration when the demands are too conflicting. In both cases, clarity suffers. Depth collapses in vision, and efficiency collapses in attention. Rivalry is the perceptual metaphor for why multitasking feels busy but leaves you drained. It is not true parallel processing. It is perceptual whiplash. Still, there is a curious upside. Rivalry forces us to confront the limits of fusion, but it also shows us the power of focus. When one image dominates, you see it clearly. When one task dominates, you can give it full attention. The trouble comes from asking the system to constantly alternate. Rivalry, in this way, teaches a paradox. Your brain is brilliant at handling one stream deeply, but fragile when forced to split. Multitasking reveals the same paradox. You are sharper in focus, weaker in division. Now imagine what this means for modern life. Every ding, buzz, and notification is like a new rivalrous image thrown into your vision. Your brain flips between them, never holding all at once, always paying a switching cost. The constant rivalry of tasks feels like multitasking, but really it is perceptual competition stretched across your day. Understanding this changes how you think about productivity. It is not about juggling. It is about choosing which input to let dominate and giving it time before the next flip. And here is the tease. If rivalry is the hidden model for how attention handles conflict, then maybe studying rivalry can help us design better ways to work, learn, and create. Maybe the key to handling distraction is not to push for more multitasking, but to manage the rhythm of alternation, to control the flips instead of being controlled by them. Rivalry does not just reveal something about vision. It reveals the architecture of attention itself, and once you see that, you cannot unsee it. Rivalry and visual attention span. Try this for a second. Stare at one image with your left eye and a completely different one with your right. At first your brain fights, then suddenly one takes over. Moments later the other grabs control. Back and forth, back and forth. What you are really witnessing is not just a quirky trick of perception. It is your visual attention span on display, stretched to its breaking point. Here is where it gets uncomfortable. We like to think our visual attention is stable, like a spotlight we can shine on whatever we choose, holding it there as long as we want. Rivalry proves otherwise. Your attention span in vision is fragile. Even when you want to hold on to both images, you cannot. Your brain drops one, boosts the other, and forces you to live inside the alternation. The unsettling part is this: it shows that your attention span is not infinite or steady. It is constantly being reset by competition, and that is the shock most people do not realize. Attention span is not just about how long you can look at something. It is about how long your brain can defend it against intruders. Rivalry reveals that every image is under siege. You are never purely locked in. There is always another stimulus waiting in the wings, fighting for dominance, ready to replace the one you are holding. Your so-called span of attention is not a long straight line. It is a fragile balance, one rival away from collapse. Now let us make this real. Imagine you are scrolling on your phone. A headline grabs you, then a notification steals your gaze, then a video thumbnail pulls you again. That rhythm of shifting is rivalry playing out in daily life. One visual grabs attention, then another interrupts, then back again. You feel like you are choosing, but much of the switching is involuntary. Just as in Binocular Rivalry, where you cannot decide which image dominates, your visual attention span online is constantly being hijacked by whatever wins the perceptual battle. And scientists who study rivalry have noticed something crucial. The average duration of dominance, how long one image holds before the other takes over, maps surprisingly well onto how short our attention spans really are. We are talking seconds, not minutes. Rivalry becomes a laboratory version of our everyday struggle to hold focus. If you cannot hold a single stable image in rivalry for more than a few seconds, how can you expect to hold a social media post, a task, or a visual scene in real life without being interrupted? The brain is built for turnover. Here is the validating insight. This does not mean you are broken or weak for having a limited span. It means rivalry exposes how the system works by design. Your brain evolved to keep scanning, to avoid tunnel vision, to stay alert for threats and opportunities. If attention was perfectly locked, you might miss the predator creeping from the side or the signal of food in the corner of your vision. Rivalry forces you to confront that truth. You are not wired to stare endlessly. You are wired to switch, and your attention span is the duration between inevitable switches. And yet, there is something strangely beautiful about it. Rivalry shows that attention is alive, dynamic, unstable. It is not a rigid spotlight, but a dance of dominance. The discomfort you feel when your focus keeps flipping is actually a reminder that curiosity and vigilance are baked into perception. You are built to keep moving, to keep re-sampling the world. Even when it feels frustrating, that limited span is also the reason you notice novelty, the reason you get curious, the reason you stay alive. Let's zoom out to media and design. Creators know your attention span is brief, so they use Rivalry-like techniques to keep you hooked. Quick cuts in film, fast scene changes in videos, flashing notifications on screens. Each competes for dominance, forcing your focus to refresh over and over. You may think you are choosing to pay attention, but the system is playing rivalry with you, engineering the rhythm of switches so you never drift away. Rivalry is not just a lab experiment. It is the hidden mechanic of how modern media captures your eyes. But there is a cost. Just as prolonged rivalry can feel mentally draining, extended overstimulation of attention leads to fatigue. Your span gets shorter, your flips get faster, and focus fragments. Rivalry becomes not just a metaphor, but a mirror for what happens when the world asks too much of your attention span. You get caught in endless alternation, never deep focus, never rest. That is why people crave silence or meditation. They are trying to pause the rivalry, to extend one state long enough to feel whole again. And here comes the tease. If rivalry reveals the fragile nature of visual attention span, could it also be the key to training it? Could deliberately engaging with rivalrous images teach the brain to extend dominance, to resist switching, to strengthen focus? Or is the lesson the opposite? That attention span is not meant to be stretched endlessly, but embraced as a rhythm, a natural alternation we should design around instead of fight against. Rivalry does not just show us the limits of our span. It dares us to rethink what attention really means. Neural oscillations during perceptual switching. Think about what happens the moment your perception flips during rivalry. 1 second you are convinced you see the striped pattern. The next second, without warning, the dots take over. That sudden switch feels mysterious, almost magical. But deep inside your brain, something rhythmic is already preparing the flip. That something is neural oscillation, the natural rhythm of your brain waves. Here is the part that surprises almost everyone. Those flips you experience are not random. They are tied to the timing of brain waves cycling in the background. Just like a drummer setting the beat for a band, your brain uses oscillations to set the tempo for when perception can change. The shock is that your sense of vision is not continuous and smooth the way it feels. It is pulsing, interrupted, and regulated by waves. Rivalry makes that pulsing visible. Every flip reveals that perception is a rhythm, not a stream. Neuroscientists have studied this by tracking electrical activity in the brain while people stare at rivalrous images. They find that when perception is about to switch, certain oscillations spike in power or synchronize across brain regions. For example, bursts of activity in the theta range, which cycles around 4 to 7 times per second, often precede a flip. Gamma waves, which buzz much faster, also play a role in binding features together when one image wins. It is like your brain has multiple drummers playing at different tempos. And when the rhythms line up in just the right way, the stage is cleared for a perceptual takeover. Now let us ground this in something personal. Have you ever felt yourself drifting in and out of focus during a lecture or while reading? One moment you are fully engaged. The next moment you realize your eyes are still scanning words, but your mind has wandered. That rhythm of drifting is not laziness. It is your brain's oscillatory system, resetting the balance of attention. The same pulsing that governs when rival images flip also governs when thoughts fade and reappear. Rivalry is simply a clean laboratory version of a rhythm you live every day. And here is why it matters. Most of us believe we are in control of when we switch focus. We like to think we decide when to notice something new. Rivalry exposes the hidden truth that the timing is often dictated by oscillations outside conscious control. The flip is not just a choice, it is a wave-driven event. That realization can be unsettling because it suggests your awareness is less like a spotlight you direct and more like a boat riding the tides of brain rhythms. You feel in control, but the waves decide when the shore comes into view. But instead of seeing that as weakness, here is the validating insight. Neural oscillations are not flaws. They are the system's way of organizing chaos. Without rhythms, the brain would be pure noise, neurons firing in a chaotic storm. Oscillations synchronize billions of cells so they can cooperate. They set windows of opportunity when information can be exchanged. They let one image dominate while another is suppressed. Rivalry is proof of how elegant this system is. Your perception feels stable not because neurons are constantly firing in harmony, but because oscillations orchestrate moments of dominance, one after the other, at just the right times. The really fascinating part is how similar this rhythm is to music. Rivalry shows you are living in a perceptual symphony, where perception itself is cut into beats. When you think you are seeing a continuous stream, you are actually hearing the drummers of your own brain keeping time. The flip from one image to another is just the downbeat, the audible strike in a rhythm that is otherwise invisible. Suddenly, the mystery of perception feels less like a trick and more like a performance. Now let's push deeper. Different oscillations seem to play different roles. Slow waves, like alpha and theta, open broad windows for attention to reset, while faster gamma waves synchronize features like edges and colors. When you feel perception change, it is not one wave, but an orchestra of them aligning. Rivalry gives neuroscientists a perfect way to watch how those rhythms interact, because each flip is like a marker in time. Every switch is a snapshot of the moment the brain's rhythms allowed awareness to shift. Without rivalry, that inner beat would be much harder to see. And here is the practical link. Understanding oscillations is not just academic. They connect to sleep cycles, to focus, to creativity, even to mental health. Disruptions in oscillatory rhythms are linked to conditions like schizophrenia and attention deficit. Rivalry experiments have shown that people with these conditions often have different switching patterns, hinting that their brain rhythms may be out of sync. Rivalry, in this way, is not just a curiosity. It is a window into whether your brain's orchestra is tuned or off-key. So the next time you experience a flip, notice how sudden yet inevitable it feels. That inevitability is the rhythm at work. You cannot hold both images. You cannot stop the switch. What you can do is marvel at the hidden beat guiding your awareness. And here is the tease. If oscillations orchestrate perception, what happens when we learn to tune them? What if training brain rhythms through meditation, neurofeedback, or even sound and light stimulation could change how often or how clearly you perceive? Rivalry might be more than just a laboratory trick. It could be the training ground for harnessing the rhythms that underlie consciousness itself. Rivalry with motion versus static images. You are shown two pictures, one to each eye. The left sees a simple red square, perfectly still. The right sees a green circle, also perfectly still. What happens is classic rivalry. One image dominates for a few seconds, then the other takes over, back and forth in that strange tug of war. Now switch it up. Instead of a static green circle, the right eye sees a spinning wheel. Suddenly, the rivalry feels more intense. The motion grabs, holds, and refuses to let go in the same way the still square did. It is a whole new fight, and your brain feels it immediately. The shock here is that motion has an unfair advantage in rivalry. Our visual system is wired to treat movement as urgent, so when one eye sees motion and the other sees something static, motion almost always dominates. It feels like the static image is being bullied, constantly pushed aside, barely given time to shine. Rivalry in this setup exposes something fundamental about vision. You do not just see the world, you prioritize it. Motion wins because motion could mean survival. A moving predator, a falling branch, a running figure. These demand attention in ways a still object never can. Think about how unsettling that is. Even in a controlled lab setting, where you know there is no threat, your brain still cannot ignore motion. The static image is forgotten like background noise. Rivalry lays bare this hierarchy. Your visual system is not democratic. It is ruthless. It does not give equal time to every stimulus. It picks favorites, and motion sits at the top of the pyramid. But there is something validating about that realization too. This is not weakness. This is the brilliance of evolution. Your ancestors who were more sensitive to motion were the ones who noticed the predator creeping, the fruit falling, the storm building on the horizon. Their brains tilted the rivalry in favor of motion, and because of that, they survived. The ones who were overly fascinated with static details while ignoring motion probably did not. So when you feel that bias inside rivalry, what you are feeling is your brain's survival wiring in action. And this is where it gets fascinating. Rivalry with motion versus static images does not just reveal a preference. It reveals how your attention span and visual awareness are shaped by urgency. If two static images compete, your brain is free to alternate more evenly. But when motion enters the scene, the rhythm of alternation shifts. The moving stimulus holds longer, returns faster, and often dominates more than half the time. This shows that your visual attention is elastic. It bends depending on the type of input. Motion stretches its hold, static shrinks it. You have probably felt this outside the lab without even realizing it. Imagine sitting in a cafe, trying to read a book. Your eyes are locked on the words, but in the corner of your vision someone gets up and walks across the room. You cannot help it. Your attention flicks to them, even though you were determined to stay with the text. That is rivalry at work. The book is your static image, the moving figure is the rival, and the winner is almost always the one in motion. Filmmakers and advertisers exploit this constantly. A moving element on screen hijacks your gaze no matter what else is there. That is why trailers flash motion, why commercials layer animations over static backgrounds, why action sequences dominate our memory of movies. Rivalry reveals why this works. Your brain gives motion special privileges. Once you know this, you realize half the visual world you think you are choosing to notice is really being chosen for you by the neural machinery that elevates motion over stillness. But rivalry also exposes something subtler. Motion is powerful, but it is not invincible. If the static image carries strong meaning, say a human face staring right at you, suddenly the battle evens out. Faces, like motion, hold evolutionary weight. In those cases, the rivalry becomes more balanced, as if the brain is negotiating between two survival cues. This shows us that rivalry is not just about strength of input. It is about relevance. Motion usually wins, but when meaning enters the static side, the rules shift. That is a crucial insight into how perception really works. And here is where the metaphor kicks in. Revelry between motion and stillness is not just a lab curiosity. It mirrors the way we live. Our lives are full of static moments. Reading, reflecting, being still. But then motion intrudes. Notifications popping, people moving, events demanding reaction. Just like in Rivalry, the stillness gets bullied, constantly interrupted by motion. If you wonder why it feels so hard to sit in quiet focus while the world buzzes around you, Rivalry explains it. Your brain was never neutral. It was built to favor movement over stillness. And here comes the tease. If Rivalry shows us that motion dominates static, what does that mean for the way we design our environments? Should we fight against that wiring by carving out static, still spaces to protect focus? Or should we embrace it, designing media and experiences that harness motion's natural dominance to guide perception deliberately? Rivalry with motion versus static images does not just show us how the brain works. It dares us to ask how we want to work with that knowledge, whether to resist it or to use it as the most natural tool for capturing human attention. Rivalry with color versus shape. Your left eye sees a bright red square. Your right eye sees a blue triangle. At first it feels like any other case of binocular rivalry. The images alternate. Red dominates, then blue pushes in, then back again. But here's the twist. The fight is not really about the objects themselves. It is about what your brain values more. The splash of color or the outline of shape. Suddenly, the rivalry is not just two images competing. It is two different dimensions of vision wrestling for control. And here is the shock. Studies have shown that the brain does not treat color and shape equally in rivalry. In fact, the outcome often depends on what type of detail the visual system locks onto first. Sometimes color dominates. A vivid, saturated patch can drown out a faint shape, holding your awareness even when the edges are lost. Other times shape wins. A sharp outline with strong contrast slices through, demanding attention even when its color is muted. Rivalry in this case reveals that what you think you are seeing is not a full picture. It is a hierarchy. Some features of vision get promoted, others demoted, depending on the brain's priorities. Think about how strange that is. You assume you are looking at objects in the world. A red square, a blue triangle. But rivalry exposes that what you are really seeing are features being assembled, piece by piece, by a system that makes hard choices. Your brain cannot process everything at once, so it lets certain features dominate while suppressing others. Sometimes it cares more about color, sometimes more about shape, and most of the time, you are completely unaware of those silent negotiations. But if you step back, it makes perfect sense. Evolution tuned us to care about different visual features in different situations. Color matters when distinguishing ripe fruit from unripe. Shape matters when recognizing predators in the grass. Rivalry simply magnifies those shifts in priority. It is not random. It is the survival logic of your brain leaking into perception. The fact that you flip between color and shape during rivalry is proof that your brain is constantly weighing which cue is more important for the task at hand. Here is a validating thought. That back and forth is not a flaw in vision. It is what makes you adaptable. A rigid system that always gave color priority would fail in darkness. A system that only cared about shape would miss crucial details like skin flush or the warning red of fire. Rivalry between color and shape shows that your brain does not lock itself into one way of seeing. It samples, compares, and updates. That flexibility is what allows humans to survive in environments that are endlessly unpredictable. You already feel this in daily life. Imagine you are driving. At a distance you spot the shape of a sign, but cannot read it yet. The outline is enough to orient you. As you get closer, the color kicks in. Red for stop, yellow for warning. Your attention shifts between shape and color, depending on what matters most in the moment. Rivalry just turns this natural process into a pure, stripped-down lab demonstration. 2 eyes, 2 features, one winner at a time. Advertisers and designers know this too. Think about logos. Some logos are defined by their shapes, like the swoosh. Others are defined by color, like the golden arches. Rivalry helps explain why different strategies work. Our brains can be captured by shape or by color, depending on context. Designers exploit whichever feature is most likely to win the perceptual tug of war in your mind. But rivalry also raises deeper questions. What does it mean if 2 people see the same image yet focus on completely different features? One might be captivated by the hue, another by the form. Rivalry with color and shape suggests perception is not a single truth, but a negotiated experience. This makes it easier to understand how disagreements about what people see can arise in everyday life. When you and a friend look at the same sunset, you may be raving about the colors while they marvel at the shape of the clouds. Neither of you is wrong. Your brains just weighted the rivalry differently. Here is the metaphorical punch. Rivalry between color and shape is not just about vision. It mirrors the way we weigh form and substance in other areas of life. Sometimes we are drawn to appearances, the color of things. Other times we focus on structure, the shape of things. And just like in rivalry, the dominance switches back and forth. You may be dazzled by presentation one moment, then later cut through to the underlying framework. Rivalry shows us that even perception itself cannot escape this constant balancing act. And now the tease. If rivalry reveals how your brain chooses between color and shape, could we learn to influence those choices? Could training, meditation, or even new forms of art teach us to hold both at once, to perceive a richer union instead of an alternating fight? Rivalry suggests the brain is capable of toggling, but not yet of integrating. What would it mean for human consciousness if we learned to hold the red square and the blue triangle together, not as rivals, but as a single, unified experience? Attention's influence on rivalry duration. Try this for a moment. Imagine you are looking at a rivalry setup where one eye sees a red square and the other sees a green circle. You are told to just let the images alternate naturally, not to interfere. What happens is what we expect. The images flip back and forth, sometimes lasting a few seconds, sometimes switching faster, a natural rhythm your brain sets on its own. Now imagine you are told something different. Focus all of your attention on the red square. Do not let the green circle win. Suddenly, the rivalry behaves differently. The red square lasts longer. The green circle gets weaker, fading sooner. Your active attention changes the actual duration of dominance. And here comes the shock. For decades, scientists believed binocular rivalry was a passive process, a mechanical battle between neurons that had nothing to do with willpower. But experiments show that your attention is not just a spectator. It is a referee. It steps in, alters the rules, and can stretch the dominance of one image while shrinking the life of another. You are not just observing the rivalry. You are shaping it in real time with your focus. That might sound small, but think about the implications. Rivalry is happening deep in your brain, in visual circuits that fire before you are even aware of what you are seeing. Yet your conscious decision to attend to one image feeds back into that system and literally changes what wins. Attention is not a spotlight shining on an already set stage. It is a hand on the controls, stretching time, tilting balance, rewriting perception. Here is where it hits home. You know the feeling of being in a crowded room, voices overlapping, and you decide to zero in on one conversation. You do not silence the others, but your chosen voice dominates longer, holds your awareness. Rivalry works the same way. Without attention, perception switches automatically. With attention, you extend one reality and compress the other. What you see lasts because you decided it should. That is not just observation. That is agency. But let's validate this before it sounds too magical. Attention does not make one image completely invincible. You cannot hold the red square forever. The green circle will eventually intrude, forcing a switch. Rivalry shows us the limits of control. You can bias perception, extend it, influence its duration, but you cannot fully erase competition. The unconscious machinery still has a say. This balance is crucial. Too much control, and you would never adapt to new information. Too little control, and you would be helpless against distraction. Rivalry with attention shows how the system negotiates between your will and your wiring. You can even test this in daily life. When reading a book and a notification flashes on your phone, you face a rivalry between text and motion. If you decide to focus on the book, your attention lengthens its dominance. The words stay clear for longer before the phone forces itself in. If you do not exert that attention, the phone wins instantly. Rivalry demonstrates the very mechanics of distraction and discipline. The duration of focus depends on how strongly you lean your attention toward one stimulus. Now consider how powerful this is for learning and creativity. Artists, athletes, and musicians often talk about being able to hold a state of focus where distractions fade away. Rivalry experiments show that this is not just poetry. It is a real, measurable phenomenon. Attention extends the life of chosen perceptions, allowing deeper engagement, richer detail, and more stable experience. When people describe flow states, what they are describing may be attention amplifying one stream of input while suppressing others, stretching the duration of dominance until it feels seamless. There is also a social dimension. Think about relationships. When someone is speaking to you, your attention literally controls how long their presence dominates your perception before other things intrude. If your attention is weak, the rivalry is short. Your mind flips to your phone, your surroundings, your own thoughts. If your attention is strong, their words hold dominance, and the rivalry with distractions shrinks. Attention is not just mental, it is relational. It shapes how long you truly inhabit the world of another person. And here comes the deeper layer. Rivalry with attention reminds us that reality is not fixed. The same physical inputs can create very different experiences depending on where you choose to point your mind. This means perception is negotiable. The world you inhabit is not just what strikes your eyes. It is what you keep alive with your attention. Rivalry makes this visible in a way no other experiment does. So here is the tease. If attention can stretch the life of one image in rivalry, could the same principle apply to thoughts, emotions, or even states of consciousness? Could focusing attention on calmness extend its dominance over anxiety? Could attending to gratitude hold it longer against the rival of resentment? Rivalry suggests that the answer might be yes. What you see, what you feel, what you live, All of it may depend less on the raw input and more on how you direct your attention to tip the scales of duration. Revelry versus fusion in 3D glasses. Think about the last time you put on a pair of 3D glasses. Maybe it was in a movie theater, maybe with one of those old red and blue paper lenses, or maybe with the sleek polarized ones they hand out now. You sit back, the film begins, and suddenly the flat screen feels like it is alive with depth. A character reaches out toward you, an explosion expands into the theater. A car seems to fly right past your seat. It feels natural, effortless, like your eyes were made to do this. What you are actually experiencing is not rivalry, but fusion. Both eyes are receiving different images, yet instead of competing, your brain blends them into a single, unified perception of depth. And here is the shock. The exact same setup, two eyes, two different inputs, can lead to two completely opposite outcomes. Rivalry, where one eye wins and the other loses, and fusion, where the brain marries the two into harmony. How can the same biology flip between war and cooperation? That is the fascinating puzzle. 3D glasses highlight just how delicate the system really is. A tiny change in alignment, timing, or difference between the two images can tip you from smooth fusion into chaotic rivalry. The result can be magical depth or a frustrating fight of flickering and switching. Let me paint the difference. In rivalry, each eye holds on to its version of reality, and the brain cannot reconcile them. The images alternate. You see one, then the other, and never both together. In fusion, the brain decides the two inputs are close enough to be compatible. It stitches them together, and out of that union comes the perception of three-dimensional space. What matters here is not that the eyes are different, but how different they are. If the differences are within a tolerable range, like the small disparity needed for depth, fusion occurs. If the differences are too large or mismatched, like one eye seeing a red square and the other a green circle, rivalry takes over. This is why old 3D movies sometimes gave people headaches. When the alignment was slightly off, your brain was caught in a tug of war between fusion and rivalry. For a moment you would get depth, then suddenly one image would dominate, then the other, back and forth. That instability is exhausting. It is not just visual strain, it is your perceptual system working overtime, trying to force harmony where the signals refuse to match. But here is the validating insight. The fact that fusion is even possible shows how extraordinary your brain really is. Evolution had no reason to invent 3D movies, yet the same machinery that once helped your ancestors judge the distance of prey or avoid cliffs is now letting you enjoy a blockbuster in full depth. Fusion demonstrates the flexibility of perception. The brain is not locked into rivalry. It is capable of cooperation, of blending, of turning conflict into richness. You feel this every day, even without the glasses. Look around you right now. Everything you see in depth, every judgment of distance, every subtle sense of space, comes from the brain's ability to fuse two slightly different inputs. You do not notice the effort, but it is happening constantly. Rivalry reveals the competition, fusion reveals the resolution. They are two sides of the same coin, and you are walking around with both at play every moment of your life. This is why fusion is such a powerful metaphor. Think about how often in life we face conflicting inputs. Two perspectives, two opinions, two streams of information. Sometimes the differences are too large, and we get rivalry. One dominates, then the other, never together. But when the differences are close enough, when there is overlap, the brain finds a way to fuse. Out of that union comes depth, a richer experience than either view alone. Rivalry teaches us about division. Fusion teaches us about cooperation. Both are natural. Both are necessary, and here is a little curiosity hook. Some people cannot experience fusion at all. Individuals with certain vision disorders, like strabismus or amblyopia, may never see depth in 3D glasses. For them, the rivalry is constant. The brain suppresses one eye to avoid double vision, and the magic of fusion never happens. This is a reminder that what feels effortless to you is actually an incredible achievement of neural engineering. It also explains why 3D entertainment is not universal. Not every brain can pull off the trick. Now the tease. If we know that rivalry and fusion are two outcomes of the same basic condition, two eyes, two inputs, what happens if we learn to consciously influence which outcome we get? Could we train the brain to fuse more easily, to reduce rivalry, to enhance depth perception beyond what we naturally experience? Or imagine flipping it the other way. Could artists or VR designers deliberately push us into controlled rivalry to create new kinds of experiences? The boundary between rivalry and fusion is razor thin, and 3D glasses prove it. The real question is whether we can harness that boundary not just for entertainment, but for exploring entirely new dimensions of human perception. fMRI studies of binocular rivalry. Picture yourself lying inside an fMRI scanner. It is loud, it is cramped, and a set of goggles is strapped over your eyes. The researchers flash two competing images, one to each eye. Maybe it is a house in one eye and a face in the other. You are asked to press a button whenever your perception flips. From the outside, it looks like nothing is happening. You are just staring. But inside your brain, something astonishing is taking place. Here is the shock. When scientists track your brain activity with fMRI during rivalry, they find that the visual cortex is not the only region lighting up. It is not just the first stop where the eyes send signals. Higher level areas tied to attention, awareness, and decision-making flare when perception flips. The brain is not simply passing images upward like a conveyor belt. It is engaged in an ongoing struggle that reaches from raw sensory neurons all the way to regions linked with consciousness itself. Rivalry is not a visual trick. It is a whole brain event. Think about how groundbreaking this was. For years, scientists debated where rivalry was decided. Was it early, at the level of the eyes and the first stages of the visual cortex? Or was it late, in the parts of the brain that interpret meaning and awareness? fMRI helped reveal the answer both. Early areas show activity tied to the competing inputs, while higher regions pulse in rhythm with your conscious switches. It is as if the brain is layered like a courtroom. The lower regions present evidence. The higher regions deliver verdicts, and the verdict keeps flipping. To make this vivid, imagine watching that house and face example. When you report seeing the house, activity spikes in brain areas specialized for places, like the parahippocampal place area. When you report the face, activity spikes in the fusiform face area. These regions are not making up signals. They are responding as if the stimulus itself had changed, even though the input to your eyes stayed constant. Rivalry is literally painting over the stable world with your shifting perception. The fMRI images prove it. And here is the validating part. fMRI does not just confirm what you say you see, it predicts it. Researchers can often look at your brain scan and know whether you are currently perceiving the house or the face before you even press the button. The brain leaves a fingerprint of your awareness, a neural signature of perception itself. That is staggering, because it means rivalry gives us one of the clearest scientific windows into consciousness. It is not a vague philosophical debate. It is visible blood flow patterns in the brain, measurable, trackable, repeatable. This matters far beyond vision science. Rivalry has become a model system for studying awareness. Consciousness is notoriously hard to pin down. You cannot weigh it or slice it open. But rivalry offers a unique trick. The input stays the same while awareness changes. That lets scientists isolate the difference between mere sensory input and conscious perception. fMRI shows exactly which regions are tied to that difference. It is like having a controlled lab experiment on the most elusive feature of the human mind. And there is another layer. Rivalry studies show that attention plays a huge role in those brain patterns. If you are told to focus on the house, the relevant brain regions stay active longer. If you relax, the switches occur more randomly. This reveals that consciousness is not passive reception. It is an active dance of attention, decision, and perception. The scanner captures the choreography in bursts of neural activity frame by frame. You can already sense how this connects to everyday life. Your perception of reality is not just what hits your eyes. It is a choice, a bias, a pattern of activity in your brain. The world does not flip, but your awareness does. Rivalry shows us how unstable and interpretive vision really is. And fMRI lets us watch the neural gears turning as it happens. Now let us tease where this could go. If scientists can decode what you are seeing during rivalry, even when the physical stimulus stays unchanged, what else could they decode? Could future scanners read private perceptual states, track dreams, or detect shifts in awareness in people who cannot communicate? Rivalry experiments suggest it is possible. Your conscious experience leaves a trace in the brain, and fMRI is the tool revealing it. So the next time you see an fMRI brain map in an article or a documentary, remember that rivalry helped shape that science. Those glowing regions are not just abstract colors. They are the outlines of your awareness. Rivalry gave us a way to separate the world outside from the world inside, and fMRI made the invisible visible. Together, they show us that consciousness is not magic. It is measurable, and that changes everything. The role of the visual cortex in rivalry. Close your eyes for a second and imagine two completely different pictures being shown to you at the same time. A bright red circle to your left eye and a deep green square to your right. When you open your eyes, you would expect your brain to simply blend them together. Maybe a strange reddish shape, maybe a fusion of color and geometry. But that is not what happens. Instead, your brain forces you to see one, then the other, back and forth. That flickering battle is binocular rivalry. And the fascinating thing is that the fight does not happen out in the world. It happens inside your brain, in a very specific neighborhood, the visual cortex. Now here is the shocking part. The visual cortex is not just a simple camera projecting images to your mind. It is an arena, a coliseum where the signals from each eye literally compete for dominance. Rivalry is not about your eyes disagreeing. The eyes are just passive lenses. The real struggle, the real tug of war, is taking place deep in the cortical machinery at the back of your head. Scientists have learned this by studying people with split inputs, and when they peer into the activity of the visual cortex, they see waves of suppression and activation flowing through different regions as one image wins and the other fades. This means that rivalry is a cortical event, not an optical one. If rivalry happened at the level of the eyes, you would expect mixed images, or ghostly overlaps, or simple confusion. Instead, What you experience is clarity, but only one at a time. That clarity is the brain actively choosing. Early visual areas like V1 respond directly to raw features like lines and edges. Higher regions specialize in more complex categories like faces, places, or motion. When rivalry occurs, these layers start to lock horns. The lower levels are passing in competing evidence, while the higher levels decide what becomes the conscious perception. It is like a noisy debate rising through the ranks until one message gets broadcast as the winner. Here is where it gets even more compelling. fMRI and EEG studies have shown that during rivalry, the activity in the visual cortex literally reflects what you are seeing, not what your eyes are receiving. When your perception flips from the red circle to the green square, the cortical region tuned for circular shapes suddenly lights up, while the region tuned for angular shapes quiets down. Your eyes did not change. The input is still the same, but the cortex shifted allegiance. Your perception is a direct mirror of cortical activity, which is why rivalry has become such a powerful window into the study of consciousness. And here is the validating insight. The fact that rivalry is resolved in the visual cortex explains why the experience feels so real. When the circle dominates, you are not seeing a weakened blend of two signals. You are seeing a vivid, fully coherent circle. The cortex does not half commit. It silences the loser and amplifies the winner, giving you a clean perceptual world instead of an impossible hybrid. That is why you do not walk around confused every time your eyes disagree. The cortex is constantly enforcing order, creating a unified view of reality even when the inputs are contradictory. Rivalry just makes that process visible. This also highlights how flexible the cortex really is. It is not just a relay station, it is a decision-making organ. When you direct your attention, say by trying to hold onto the red circle, the relevant cortical neurons stay active longer, suppressing their rivals. When you let go, the system drifts back into unpredictable switches. The cortex is not just passively registering light. It is actively negotiating what counts as reality. Think of what this reveals about daily life. Every second, your eyes are sending slightly different images. One is sharper, one is blurrier, one is blocked by a blink or a hair. Yet you do not experience two competing worlds. You experience one seamless world. That unity is the cortex doing its job, resolving rivalry before you even notice. The moments when rivalry breaks through, when the competition becomes visible, are rare glimpses of the machinery at work. Now for the tease. If rivalry happens in the visual cortex, what happens when we manipulate the cortex directly? Imagine using brain stimulation to extend the dominance of one image, or to trigger faster switches, or even to fuse images that normally rival. Could we hack perception, override the brain's natural arbitration, and build entirely new modes of vision? The cortex is already editing your world without your permission. The real question is what happens when we learn to edit the editor. Rivalry is the crack in the curtain that shows us the stage. The visual cortex is the director calling the shots. And one day, we may get to hold the script. Cognitive load's effect on rivalry speed. Imagine trying to juggle 3 tasks at once. Maybe you are on a call, answering emails, and cooking dinner all at the same time. You feel your focus slipping, like your brain is constantly flicking between tasks, never fully landing. Now replace those tasks with competing images in your eyes. One showing a bright spinning wheel and the other a still mountain landscape. Your brain does the same thing. It flips between the two. But here is the surprising part: the speed of those flips depends not just on your eyes, but on how busy your mind already is. That mental business, what psychologists call cognitive load, can slow down or speed up rivalry. Here is the shock. You would think that binocular rivalry is strictly visual. After all, the conflict is happening in your eyes and your visual cortex. But experiments show that when you are mentally overloaded, the switches between images actually slow down. Put simply, the more your brain is juggling outside of vision, the longer it clings to a single image before flipping to the other. This means rivalry speed is not fixed. It is tied directly to how much cognitive fuel you have left to process competing perceptions. Think about that for a moment. Vision feels automatic. You assume you are just seeing the world as it is. But rivalry reveals that vision is actively managed, and the management system shares resources with your memory, your attention, and your problem solving. If those systems are drained, the switching process slows, like a computer lagging when too many apps are open. That is your brain under cognitive load. Here is why this makes sense. Rivalry is not just about raw input. It requires active competition between neural networks. Your attention system has to monitor, suppress, and boost signals back and forth. That takes resources. When those resources are scarce, say because you are doing mental math or trying to remember a long list of words, the rivalry mechanism loses agility. The brain sticks with one percept for longer because switching costs too much. The effect is subtle, but it is measurable. Cognitive load reshapes perception itself. Now here is the validating part. This is not just lab trivia. It explains something you have already felt in daily life. Think about the difference between watching an optical illusion when you are relaxed versus when you are stressed. In a calm state, your perception might flip easily, like your brain is curious, playful, open to change. In a stressed or overloaded state, the illusion locks up. You stare, and it just will not switch. That is rivalry being slowed by cognitive load. Your mind has less bandwidth for perceptual play when it is consumed with holding everything else together. This also tells us something deeper about consciousness. Rivalry shows that perception is not a sealed-off module. It is connected to your general cognitive economy. Vision borrows energy from the same pool that powers reasoning, memory, and attention. That is why when the pool runs low, perception itself becomes stickier. Reality does not change, but your awareness of it does. The images in rivalry become metaphors for how limited and flexible our cognitive resources really are. And consider the opposite case. Some studies suggest that lowering cognitive load, freeing up your mental workspace, can make rivalry switch faster. That means your brain becomes more agile, more willing to move between interpretations. Imagine meditation where attention is calm and uncluttered. Rivalry often accelerates in that state, revealing how perception thrives when the mind is spacious. The pace of rivalry becomes a kind of pulse, a rhythm that reflects your inner cognitive balance. So what does this mean for you? It means perception is not simply a window onto reality. It is a negotiation that depends on how taxed your mind is in the moment. If your brain is under pressure, the negotiation drags, clinging to one interpretation longer than usual. If your brain is free and curious, the negotiation is lively, jumping back and forth. Rivalry speed becomes a subtle indicator of your mental load, like a hidden meter of your inner state. Now let me tease you with this thought. If cognitive load influences rivalry, then rivalry could become a tool for measuring cognitive load. Imagine workplaces, classrooms, or even therapy sessions where simple rivalry tests track how mentally taxed someone is in real time. Forget clunky questionnaires. Your own eyes could reveal your mental state, moment by moment. Rivalry might one day become a diagnostic window, a way to peer into the balance between perception and cognition. The flicker rate of your awareness could be the next vital sign, right alongside heart rate and blood pressure. And that possibility all begins with this strange little phenomenon: two eyes, one brain, and a rivalry whose speed tells the truth about how overloaded you really are. How rivalry informs theories of the observer. There is something strange about sitting with binocular rivalry. On the surface, it is just an optical trick. Two images, one fed into each eye, and the brain cannot fuse them. Instead, it flicks back and forth. First you see a vivid red circle, then suddenly a sharp green square, and it keeps switching, almost like a perceptual coin toss. But what really makes rivalry fascinating is not the visuals. It is what it says about you, the one doing the seeing. Here is the part that jolts you. Rivalry reveals that the observer, the self who seems so stable and unified, is not a fixed entity. Instead, it is a process that wavers, a construction that depends on which perception wins in the moment. You feel like you are one continuous observer, calmly watching a stable world. Rivalry pulls that illusion apart. It shows you that the very sense of being an observer is bound up with how the brain resolves competition. The flips are not just in the images. They are in the seat of awareness itself. Now, people often assume that the observer sits behind the eyes, watching the inputs like a film on a screen. That is the intuitive idea of consciousness, a little self hidden inside the head. Rivalry throws a wrench into that model. If there were a single stable watcher, then the two images would be seen together, side by side, like two channels displayed on the same monitor. But that is not what happens. You do not see both. You alternate, which means the observer is not separate from perception. The observer is created by whichever perception is dominant. And here is where it gets validating. Philosophers and neuroscientists have long debated what the observer actually is. Is there a central executive, a homunculus that experiences everything? Or is consciousness more like a coalition with different brain regions competing for the spotlight? Rivalry gives weight to the coalition theory. The observer is not one thing. It is whatever network of neurons currently holds sway. When the red circle dominates, the observer is a circle seer. When the green square takes over, the observer is a square seer. The flips are not happening in front of you. They are happening to you. This helps explain why rivalry feels so uncanny. It is not just an optical glitch. It is a demonstration that the self is less solid than it seems. You are not a single unbroken stream. You are a series of momentary constructions stitched together. Rivalry just makes the stitching visible. The act of observing is itself unstable, flickering between interpretations the same way the images do. And it gets deeper. Rivalry shows that observation is not passive. The brain is not waiting for the world to present itself. It is actively editing, suppressing, and amplifying signals. The observer is a result of that editing process, which means observation is more like authorship. You are not just seeing. You are constantly writing the script of what counts as reality in this instant. That script changes whenever the perceptual balance tips. This may sound abstract, but it actually connects to everyday experience. Think about how your sense of self changes depending on what you are focused on. When you are deeply immersed in a book, the observer is a story absorber. When you are anxious, The observer is a threat detector. Rivalry compresses that same dynamic into seconds. It shows you the mechanics of selfhood in fast forward. You do not notice this in daily life because the shifts are slower, more contextual. Rivalry speeds it up, letting you watch the self reassemble in real time. Here is the kicker. Rivalry suggests that the observer is not a singular core, but a shifting vantage point. If you take that seriously, it has big implications. It means that your identity, your continuity, even your sense of agency, might be less about an inner witness and more about whichever perception or interpretation is currently winning the neural competition. The observer is a moving target, not a fixed eye in the sky. And now the tease. If rivalry shows that the observer is constructed, then what happens when we learn to influence that construction? What if technology, meditation, or even brain stimulation could stabilize one version of the observer or allow us to toggle between multiple modes of self? Could we design experiences where your sense of who is watching changes as quickly as the images themselves? Rivalry cracks open the possibility that the observer is not something you are, but something you can shape. It suggests that awareness is not a mirror of reality. It is the battleground on which reality is decided, and that realization is as unsettling as it is liberating. Rivalry as a probe into hallucination studies. You are looking at two images, one fed into each eye. A red spiral in the left, a blue grid in the right. You expect to see them combined somehow, but instead your perception wavers. Red spiral, blue grid, back and forth, never both together. That is binocular rivalry. On the surface it is just a quirky trick of vision, but beneath the surface it gives us a tool, almost like a flashlight, to study one of the strangest corners of the human mind: hallucinations. Here is the part that really shakes you. Hallucinations feel utterly real to the person experiencing them. They are not blurry fantasies or ghostly afterimages. They can be as vivid as the world in front of you. For decades, scientists were stuck with a problem. How do you study something that exists only in someone's inner perception? You cannot hold a hallucination in your hand. You cannot project it on a lab wall. But rivalry offers a clever way in. By forcing the brain to toggle between competing realities, it mimics the unstable experience of hallucination. That means researchers can measure and probe it under controlled conditions. Think about how powerful that is. In rivalry, the images on your retinas do not change, but your experience of them does. The flips are entirely internal. That is exactly what happens in hallucinations. The outside world may be stable, but the mind generates shifts in what is seen or heard. Rivalry creates a repeatable laboratory version of that phenomenon. The brain is confronted with two inputs, but perception refuses to merge them. Instead, it conjures a winner and suppresses the loser. That tug of war is not unlike the brain generating a hallucination that feels more real than reality itself. Now let's ground this in everyday logic. You have probably noticed how easy it is for the mind to generate vivid experiences. Think about dreaming. While you sleep, entire worlds appear. You do not doubt them until you wake. Rivalry is like a waking cousin to that dream state. The red spiral and the blue grid alternate, even though nothing in the external world is switching. Your brain is rehearsing the same process that, in other contexts, could tip into full-blown hallucination. That makes rivalry an ideal probe. It is safe, controllable, and yet deeply revealing of how perception can detach from reality. Here is where it gets validating. Studies have shown that people who are prone to hallucinations, such as those with certain psychiatric conditions, often experience rivalry differently. Their perceptual switches may be slower, or they may even report mixed images that most people rarely see. That means rivalry is not just a curiosity. It is a potential marker of how vulnerable the brain is to generating false realities. When scientists compare rivalry patterns across groups, they gain insight into the mechanics of hallucinations without needing patients to be actively hallucinating during the experiment. And this connects to something we all share. Even if you have never hallucinated in a clinical sense, your brain hallucinates all the time in smaller ways. When you see faces in clouds, when you hear your phone buzz, even though it did not, when you swear you saw movement in the corner of your eye. Rivalry makes those tendencies visible. It shows that perception is not a mirror. It is a guess, and sometimes those guesses drift so far from reality that they become hallucinations. The more you think about it, the clearer it becomes. Rivalry is not just about vision. It is about the fragile contract between brain and world. The fact that two static images can throw your perception into chaos proves how thin that contract really is. And if such a simple trick can create uncertainty, imagine what happens when stress, fatigue, or neurological conditions add fuel to the system. Hallucinations stop seeming so alien. They are an exaggerated version of the same instability you taste during rivalry. Now let me tease you with this. If rivalry can act as a probe into hallucinations, then perhaps it could one day help us predict or even treat them. Imagine a future where rivalry tests are used like mental X-rays, showing early signs of perceptual instability, or therapy sessions where controlled rivalry exercises train the brain to handle conflicting inputs more gracefully, reducing the risk of hallucinations spiraling into distress. Rivalry is not just a party trick for vision scientists. It might become a doorway into understanding, and maybe even softening, the hallucinations that blur the line between mind and world.